The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 621 Hassle. Emperor Jotun reappeared at the inn, to once again deliver a message to the innkeeper. For some reason, he had become the dedicated messenger between the Henali and the innkeeper, at least as far as current matters went. He was hoping that this matter would conclude soon. After all, not only did he have his own matters to tend to, but he also did not enjoy constantly antagonizing a dowlord. He understood well that even if the innkeeper was disgruntled, he could absolutely decimate his empire, but would at most get a slap on the wrist, symbolic punishment at most. That is what it meant to be a dowlord. Let alone something as insignificant as the extinction of a minor empire, even in all-out war between overlord civilization, the actual death of a dowlord was rare. Just as he was about to head off towards the innkeeper's office, he noticed something strange. He did not need to use his spirit sense to be in tune with his environment. Due to his cultivation realm, the universe around him itself spoke to him. As such, he immediately noticed an extremely hostile emotion circulating between the inn's workers, concentrating somewhere in the distance. He only needed to look in the direction to see hundreds of inn workers surrounding 3 rhino centaurs, with Luther alone taking all 3 of them on. He did not know the context, and quite frankly he did not care. His attention, instead, was on Luther's bloodline. A single glimpse was enough for him to understand its complexities, and the laws working behind the scenes. Although he had not seen it in action before, he had read about it in the Sephor family records. Anachronistic ignition. Suddenly, he felt a hint of anticipation. He longed to see the inn's performance on the battlefield. He had a feeling, a premonition, that it would be worth witnessing. A notification from the inn suddenly distracted him. In a few days, there will be an auction. Lex looked over the list of items he was accepting from the Emporium in return for a couple drops of elixir. As it happened, he unwittingly discovered some items that would help him immensely. Such as a cultivation technique that was available only to the Emporium VIPs. It was called God's Eye, and it was to be used in conjunction with the fancy contact lenses. Once the two were paired together, the effects. Well, it was sufficient to say Lex was impatient to witness it for himself. He also discovered some items which would help in the upgrade of the butter knife. Not to mention he found some incredibly valuable ores which he planned on keeping for his own personal use to make weapons to use outside the inn. He found some treasures he thought would be useful for himself and some for his workers and inn. Besides those, he collected 5 items which could minutely influence certain laws. However, besides all these, the thing that Lex took the most was information. He took the highest levels of knowledge on the civilizations inside the origin realm, the top races, the history of the realm itself, valuable treasures, items and phenomenon. Out of all of that, the thing that Lex was looking most forward to was the complete cultivation realm guide for all races inside the origin realm. It wasn't quite complete, but it had all the pertinent information on all the important races inside the realm. He could help but peek at the breakup of the cultivation realms inside the origin realm, at least as per human standards. According to what Lex knew, humans who did not cultivate were considered to be in the mortal realm. That was apparently a misconception. They were merely referred to as baseline humans. It was instead the entire first few realms which fell under the category of mortals. The sequence was mortals or base humans, body tempering, chi training, rho alpha pi d alpha s nu omicron b epsilon l omicron m foundation realm, golden core, nascent. I think you should take a look at snovel.c omicron m. All of these were the mortal realms of cultivation for humans. These were followed by the immortal realms, which were earth immortal and heaven immortal. The realm after that, which was the peak natural realm in the origin realm, was actually based off of, and inspired by a certain humanoid species that existed. As such, the realm's name coincided with the name of the race, the celestial realm. Just reading the name gave Lex goosebumps, and filled his heart with a dreadful pressure. It felt like he had encountered something he was not qualified to know. It felt like an entire race of unimaginably powerful beings was suddenly aware of him. It felt like Lex snorted, and channeled his spirit energy, causing the feeling to dissipate. Lex had even looked Downlords in the eye. He was not afraid of simply gaining some knowledge. In fact, at this point, even regal embrace gave him a warning. Sometimes foreknowledge was not good for his cultivation. The snort was a reply to that prompt. Besides all of that, Lex also accumulated 1 million Emporium credits to use in the future. Truthfully, if he had time, Lex could get himself a better deal, but time was exactly what he was short of. It was better to take a small loss and hurry up than quibble over small gains. With the meeting done, Lex promptly collected several small bottles which would be able to contain the elixir and exited the Emporium. Even Powell noticed his rush towards the end but didn't comment on it. Lex teleported to the inn and quickly scanned it. John was still in his deathmatch, and Lex could do nothing to interfere with that even if he wanted. But the other three were still at the inn, and were in fact being beaten up by Luther. The innkeeper's trusty assistant still looked like he was in perfect condition, mostly because he kept using his bloodline to send all his injuries and fatigue into the future. Lex nodded, but then donned his Leo persona and teleported over. He did not talk, discuss, or deliberate. He straight up kicked one of the rhino centaurs into the ground, forming a massive crater. His sudden appearance had taken everyone by surprise, but he didn't have the time to wave at the audience. Seeing that a single hit with his immense strength was not enough to incapacitate them, Lex immediately entered his berserk state. He ran forward, the push of his legs forming small craters in the ground where he stepped, and smacked the other rhino centaurs down to the ground. In his heightened emotional state, Lex performed a move he had done once before and quite enjoyed. He grabbed one of the rhino centaurs, and used its body to begin smashing the other two. At this point even Luther was startled by the absolute barbarism, but then grinned and joined in. The rhino centaurs were tough foes, and could take on dozens of enemies in the same realm at the same time. They could not, however, take on an impatient Lex and an incensed Luther. In less than a minute, the foes were defeated. Pulverized would be a more apt description, but the details weren't so important. I will be interrogating these three myself, Lex told Luther. The innkeeper already knows their motives, so you don't have to be concerned. I'm just going through the motions. Luther was a little upset that he wouldn't get to question the three himself, but it was all right. More importantly, he couldn't go against the innkeeper's wishes. As for Lex, of course he would not let anyone else question them. The secret about systems was too great. Maybe one day it would be common knowledge at the inn, but for now he wanted to keep things quiet. More importantly, one of them even had a system of his own which Lex was looking forward to absorbing. It was so tough to decide. Should he upgrade his system first, or absorb more elixir? Just kidding, the elixir was a time-sensitive matter. It took priority, for now. Just as Lex sent the three rhino centaurs away, he received a notification. It was not the system penalizing him for assaulting his guests who had not broken the rules, he'd already gotten that one. Instead, he was informed that Alexander was looking for Lex urgently. The Emperor of Jotun had also arrived, and was once again requesting a meeting. Also, one of the children in the kids' area of the inn had proposed to another child there, and they had taken an oath of a 10-year engagement, which had incensed the kids' parents who demanded to speak with upper management of the inn. Lex could not help but sigh. Whichever identity he took, he was always in such demand. Being important was such a hassle. Lex teleported away, leaving the encirclement to break up. Gerard approached Luther and the two fell into a discussion, the contents of which were unknown. Inside the innkeeper's office, a projection of the innkeeper appeared. Elsewhere in the inn, Lex appeared just out of sight of Alexander and walked forward. Chapter 622 Much too convenient. Lex cleared his mind as he walked up to Alexander. Various random thoughts were floating in his mind, from the system he had to take from the invader, to the wedding preparations, to the probable deployment of the inn staff to battlefields. There was a lot of stuff he needed to get done, but stressing over them would be more wasteful than helpful. He had to take things in his stride. When Lex approached Alexander, he found the teenager grimacing as he looked into the distance. He also looked a little worn out. It was clear that Lex had not had any time to rest lately, and whatever tasks he was busy with were quite strenuous. "You don't look so good," Lex said frankly as he walked up to him. Alexander turned to look at Lex and inspected his appearance. Lex was dressed quite casually, but due to his extremely fit body, he still looked good. That wasn't what Alexander was looking at, however. Instead, he was paying attention to the fact that Lex looked quite relaxed. "You look pretty good for someone whose planet is at war," he said passive-aggressively. Lex did not take his tone to heart. The fact that Alexander looked weary at all meant that he had likely been through some harrowing experiences. If only Lex knew that Alexander had been taking orders from Bell, he would truly sympathize with how tough his life as of late had been. "The whole universe is at war," Lex said casually as he took a seat opposite to Alexander. "Besides, it's not like I alone can stop the war. Or change things for that matter. Not to mention, I've long left Earth behind. I've heard you've done the same, NOV/O/. Though Lex said that, the Inn had probably played the greatest role in altering the course of the war than anyone else. The deities would never have arrived on the planet, and the robots' invasion would not have subdued without the deterrence of the Innkeeper, and there would be no refugees. Objectively, Lex had helped a lot already. But personally, he had contributed only very little." Alexander sighed, but controlled himself. He realized that he was venting unnecessarily on Lex. He enveloped himself and Lex in an isolation bubble so that they could have a conversation in private. "The situation on Earth is more complicated than it seems. Who knew I would leave Earth to join the Jotun Empire, only to be sent back to Earth?" Lex raised an eyebrow, but did not speak. He was truly curious about what secrets the situation on Earth could have that he didn't already know. He was also curious about why Alexander was even telling him. How could it be more complicated than alien robots invading the entire planet with the intention of enslaving everyone? The war has already transcended what it started out as. While that's good for Earthlings, because at least for now they can survive, I fear that soon we will forever lose the solar system to greater forces. "Even Mars?" Lex asked in surprise. "Several forces have already approached my family with propositions to either sell the planet or enter into a partnership. All of them have some degree of interest in the war. Although for now, my family has not accepted the sale, it is only a matter of time before they accept a deal." Lex frowned for a moment, but recovered quickly. No matter what, the solar system was a part of the Empire, so they would not completely ignore it, right? Before Lex could think further on the topic, Alexander continued. "No, it's not the war alone that is the cause of complications. Do you know why the robots invaded?" "Why?" Lex asked without trying to show off his knowledge. He was still interested in why Alexander was freely sharing information with him, so he wanted to see what he had to tell. "A terrorist," Alexander said, allowing an exhausted sigh to escape. "It's common knowledge that I've joined the army, but even among them, due to my excellent performance, I've been assigned to a special operations unit called Valkyrie Unit. We've been looking into why Earth was suddenly invaded, and we've discovered that this was a plot of an intergalactic terrorist called Jeffrey. You may think that inciting a full-on war on Earth was bad, but the scale of his activities has escalated greatly since leaving the planet. It appears as though he is a part of a massive terrorist organization which is utilizing various alien influences to spread chaos amongst human influences. I think you should take a look at. The use of the AI nation against a planet is a major incident, but not easily replicable. Yet the number of demon invasions, plagues, civil wars, and worse since he escaped Earth is off the charts. Considering the size of the Empire, I would be surprised if they don't have a team qualified enough to hunt this Jeffrey down. I don't see why you're concerned about it. Like I said, the matter is far from simple. As far as the whole organization is concerned, someone else will take care of it. But the team I'm a part of will be specifically hunting down Jeffrey. What do I have to do with all this?" Lex asked. In truth, he did not mind patiently waiting till Alexander revealed it on his own, but he could tell that the other was waiting for Lex to ask specifically this. Well, other than the fact that I thought you might be interested in hunting down the guy who single-handedly put Earth to destruction? Due to the special nature of the team that I'm in, I have the right to recruit anyone I deem helpful temporarily, or even permanently, as a soldier of the Empire. Moreover, I'm going on an infiltration mission soon, and I think that I might need your help. You're showing an awful lot of trust, telling me all this. We aren't even in the Chamber of Secrets. Aren't you worried I won't accept your offer, and then spread the news? Not really, Alexander said, showing an incomparably confident expression. Take it as a gut feeling. I don't think you'll betray me, and I definitely think you'll be interested in this mission. Don't you think you're evaluating me a little too high if you want me to take on a terrorist organization willy-nilly? You don't understand. I'm not asking you to take on a terrorist organization. This is not about acting out of the goodness of your heart. I'm asking you to help me out. Lex raised an eyebrow. Since Luther was currently busy, Lex had to summon Jotun to his office himself, though that was no real issue. The Emperor entered the room, silently grateful that he didn't need to wait for weeks on end for the Innkeeper to receive him. Although their last meeting had been incredibly tense, for Jotun at least, true to his word, the Innkeeper maintained full civility, towards him at least. He was not exactly completely privy to what the Innkeeper had written in his epistle previously, but it had caused an enormous reaction between their ranks. Even as merely one of their agents, Jotun was able to sense the reverberations amongst their ranks. Although Jotun tried not to speculate, he could not help but come to the conclusion that the Innkeeper had an extremely massive and influential background to affect the Henali like that. How was he supposed to know that, in truth, Lex's attempts to avoid the payment he was due had caused massive misunderstandings amongst them? He had asked them to prove that he had entered the origin realm from the outside, which they were unable to do. His obvious power level, yet mysterious background and origin, alongside the inability to trace his entry into the origin realm, created an unsolvable mystery. Perhaps if he hadn't almost destroyed a deity with a single move earlier, some might have doubted that he was a Dowlord. Now that he had proved his identity, his bold claims led to only one single possible conclusion: the origin realm hid a massive secret that surpassed even the Henali's understanding. For the first time in a long, long time, the mysterious race was getting ready to deploy themselves across the realm to search out its secrets. It was with all this happening in the background that the Innkeeper took from Jotun one more missive, secretly hoping for a favorable message. If the Henali insisted he pay. Fortunately, no such thing happened. The message only contained two things. One was a self-deployable teleportation formation. The other item was a small letter, listing out the details of the deployment of the inn's workers. Since most of the Innkeeper's workers were low-leveled, they were assigned an appropriate battlefield in the galaxy Swera. There were a few conditions for their deployment listed out, but the Innkeeper had paused reading. His eyes were fixed on the name of the galaxy. Wasn't that where a huge secret lay waiting for him to discover? This was much too convenient. Chapter 623 Bitterness. How exactly would I help you out? Lex asked, leaning forward. To be honest, he did not mind improving his relationship with Alexander. It was one of the few things that his intuition hinted at, which he was already planning on doing. Although, as the Innkeeper, he came across numerous powerhouses, he did not have a close connection to any of them. Sure, Ragnar had helped him out when he needed it, and the Emporium treated him well enough, but there was still a difference between personal and business relationships. These things were not really certain, but he felt like he should maintain a strong relationship with his few contacts from Earth. Whether it was the charismatic Larry, the overwhelming Marlowe, the bold Alexander, all had potential for growth in the long run. Moreover, he had to take the long view of things from now on. He was a cultivator now, and it was normal for cultivators to have a very long life. As a golden core cultivator, his natural lifespan was a minimum of 250 years. This was the minimum because there was nothing ordinary about his cultivation at all. He would not be surprised if his lifespan was even double of that. But his lifespan did not really matter to him, for now at least. He had barely begun to cultivate, and he expected that he would soon overcome the obstacles in his path and continue to raise his cultivation realm long before he neared the end of his lifespan. So, as someone who would likely live for thousands of years or more, he had to start thinking about his future. Sure, the innkeeper identity would stay as a powerful and enigmatic being, but such a lofty identity would also keep him from forming close connections. It was instead his normal identity as Lex that would serve as extremely useful in this regard. I am not really worried about my safety. Being able to retreat to the inn at any time I want ensures that I can avoid fatal danger. Instead, I am concerned about being unable to catch up to my target in time because I'm held back by his fellow operatives. Although I am part of a team, each member has been given a specific task that they have to complete on their own within a certain time frame. Fortunately, I am allowed to recruit help to complete my mission. If that's the case, why try to recruit me instead of someone from the army? I can't explain it, Alexander said, shaking his head. Call it instinct, but I have a feeling I'll work better with you than anyone else. The kind of synergy we had back at the pagoda is not something that can be achieved so easily with just anyone. Besides, and I don't say this lightly, you can really take a hit. When fighting against crazy, suicidal terrorist maniacs, that is a very important quality. Lex found it interesting that Alexander too was beginning to rely on his instincts. Although Lex didn't believe his peers' instincts would be as powerful as his own, it was a good reminder that he wasn't the only one in the universe with such potent senses. One day, his enemies with a stronger instinct could use it against him. He would have to be mentally prepared to counter such abilities. Alright, I'll help. But there's one thing that's important for me to know before I do anything. When do you need my help, and how long do you think it will take? I have quite a few important things to keep an eye on, and I can't leave him for a long time. Alexander looked hesitant. Will it be possible for you to use the inn's prestige level 3 ability? If you haven't reached that level, I can provide you with the funds for it, but the thing is that you'll be stuck unable to use it again for 10 years. That means you might not be able to return to your original location so easily. Where do you want me to go? Lex asked, instead of answering directly. Vegas Minima. I can take care of the details so that as soon as you appear on the planet a transportation formation will be ready for you to take you to another planet, so it won't take long. The operation is likely there, and I won't need your help anytime soon. But chances are I'll need your help at a moment's notice, so it would be for the best if you were already on that planet. Lex nodded and said, I'll head on over soon. That won't be an issue, but I can't stay on the planet infinitely. Once I reach whatever planet you need, I'll be teleporting back to the inn to focus on some other tasks I have going on. Whenever you need me, you can reach me through the inn and I'll teleport back there. The two soon reached an agreement and shook hands. I think you should take a look at. Back in his office, with not much else to talk about, Lex concluded his meeting with Jotun, much to the Emperor's relief. It seemed that his role in delivering messages to the inn was concluded, for now. The Emperor narrowed his eyes as he thought of the tasks that lay before him. Upon their return, his brothers informed him that, as Jotun had been suspecting, the seeds of rebellion had been planted across his empire, and were beginning to bloom. It seemed he had appeared far too benevolent in protecting the humans against the foreign races. It was time to correct that, and remind them all why it was that they needed him so. In his office, Lex was focused on other things entirely. He was glad that in this latest correspondence, there was no mention of his debt. But while that in itself was a relief, the battle requirements for the inn were extremely harsh, at least in his eyes. In truth, the Henali were asking the bare minimum from him, so that he could symbolically perform his duties. But how would they know that Lex was not really a Dowlord, and the inn's forces were in fact quite pathetic? Depending on how it was looked at, 1,000 Foundation realm cultivators were requested to be sent on the battlefield. Moreover, they only needed to participate for 5 years. That would complete the Innkeeper's requirements for the next century. To the overlords of this realm, such requirements were basically letting the Innkeeper off scot-free. Even this was only done after Jotun reported that he suspected that the innkeeper's origins had something to do with the devils, or at least that they had a deep history. To Lex, though, this was an extremely difficult requirement to fulfill. It would take away all of his oldest and most trusted employees and send them to a battlefield from which they might not return. Realistically speaking, since they were being sent to war, it was likely most of them would not return. As if that was not enough, he had only a week to send them. For the first time in a long time, helplessness and bitterness filled Lex's heart. He knew that he was already doing his best, but sometimes in the face of reality, one's best was not enough. But the feeling did not last. Not only had Lex toughened up, a part of evolving into a being of a higher level of existence meant that his mindset also evolved. For example, if a normal human had to live for 10,000 years, it was most likely he would kill himself out of depression long before the time even arrived, such were the vicissitudes of a long life. But cultivators obviously had no problem, because their mindsets and emotions also evolved. Moreover, Lex had the system to depend on. As much as he did not like relying on it all the time, it was also true that it was his biggest ace card. The first thing that he did was look at his MP recently. He had gained 500 billion MP as a result of Ragnar's quests in the guild room. Besides that, he had been earning a whole lot due to the festivities, but he was still a distance away from reaching 1 trillion. He had an idea, and began planning things out in his mind. Mary, spread the word. The auction for the cosmic erosion elixir will take place in 3 days. Before then, other guests who wish to auction items can also submit them to the inn, but only accept them if their minimum value crosses 1 billion MP. Have the planning division plan out the auction, then let me know the details. I don't have the time to focus on it. Also, I've been planning a special and employee banquet for quite a while. Let everyone know it will happen in 6 days. Without waiting for a response from her, Lex teleported away back to his room. It was time for him to take another sip of the elixir. At the same time, he teleported the Rhino Centaur with a system over as well. It was best to use time as efficiently as possible. If he wanted to clear this hurdle, the system would need an upgrade as well. Chapter 624 Evolving Mindset. The Midnight Inn was always busy, and the multitude of guests were all enjoying various experiences. Some were extremely significant, such as the agreement between Alexander and Lex. It was not easy for Alexander to trust someone, especially a person he knew for such a short time, but he had chosen to do so nonetheless. They shook hands. Other experiences were mundane and ordinary, such as what Jill, the fox who participated in Lady Cosmos, was having. Since she had decided to live at the inn in perpetuity, she had decided to take a nap under one of the purple crystal trees that filled the inn. Due to the winter theme that the inn was currently following, a thin blanket of snow covered the inn's many hills, allowing her to nap comfortably. It was a good nap. Some experiences were key moments in the guests' lives, and would not only form their core memories, but also shape their futures. Jimmy stood silently, his tiny fists clenched, as he watched Layla being taken away by her grandmother. She was a princess, and he was a nobody. She had been trained and nurtured since birth to be a leader, while he could not even speak to others due to shyness, until quite recently. Her disposition was perfect to cultivate, while he could not have been more average. Even if their engagement had originally just been a joke during one of their games, the strong reaction it had elicited was enough to put him in his place. Unfortunately, Jimmy did not like the place he was being put. Besides Jimmy, his mother, Hera, also looked ahead as she firmly held her son's hand with her right hand. She had been rising quickly on Earth and their futures looked bright, right up until Earth was invaded. She had played a significant role in allowing Will Bentham's Rose Society to expand, but now it was all worthless. Well, not quite. She had gained significant experience through it, and that experience had been noticed and appreciated. In her left hand, she held a platinum key. Apparently, she had been noticed by the inn's planning division, and they had recommended her for recruitment to the inn. The innkeeper had accepted, and she had just been delivered a key. She was a warrior in her own way, and she would fight to give her son a better life. Other experiences still were intense and stressful, but were destined to be blurred in with the rest of the tough moments one had in their lives, such as with Emperor Jotun, who was planning his future. It would be bloody. Life was strange, in how one moment, experienced by different people in the same place, could hold so many different emotions and feelings. But every single one of those experiences was disturbed when a strange change occurred at the inn. Whether it was the two geniuses of Earth who were shaking hands, whether it was the child lost in emotions he could not understand, whether it was the Emperor deciding the fate of entire galaxies, whether it was the fox that asleep, or any one of the countless other guests at the inn, they all looked up at the sky. The rather calm and serene sky of the inn changed, momentarily, to a starry night sky. But unlike the normal night sky, which was a beautiful tapestry of all that the universe had to offer, from moons to planets to stars and galaxies far off, this visage was that of its endless depth. It evoked a feeling that all they saw was unfathomably less than all the universe truly held, and was a reminder that they were only looking at the very surface of the well of infinity. I think you should take a look at. They did not understand what was happening, but had the feeling that something significant was taking place. In truth, the inn was once again reacting to Lex's emotions. Usually, when the inn reacted to Lex's emotions, it was because he was angry. It was because it would take significant enough emotions for Lex to subconsciously influence the inn. But currently, Lex was experiencing a subtle evolution in his mindset. It was unknown if it was because Lex had pretended to be the innkeeper so long, or for other reasons, but more and more frequently Lex found himself unwilling to bend or give up. He was unwilling to be deterred, even by an entity so much stronger than himself, and he was unwilling to cower before the design of fate. He was not stupid or arrogant, thinking he could resist the great powers of the universe simply because he decided not to. No, the difference between confidence and arrogance was ability. If he truly had the ability to resist, his desire to remain unyielding would become a result of his confidence, not mindless arrogance. He was fortunate enough to be given the tools to resist fate, he understood that. But using those tools effectively was also up to him. He had been resisting the system for very long because he did not understand its purpose and what he stood to lose if it turned against him. While he still did not know the answer to that, he at least knew the answer to what he would lose if he didn't use the system to the best of his abilities. If he had to send his workers outside the inn, for whatever reason, he would make sure they upheld the dignity of the inn, even on a battlefield. This was also a good reminder, not only for him but all the employees of the inn. There wouldn't always be a convenient solution to problems, such as the butter knife. Sometimes, they would have to get their own hands dirty. With these subtle changes going through his head, Lex reached forward and put his hand on the rhino centaur, reaching into its soul with his own soul sense. He found a familiar shining golden speck and pulled it out. System notification, new system detected. Analyzing the secondary system. Overnight, celebrity system grade D- detected. Begin assimilation? Y/N. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 625 Aduous cultivation. System notification, new system detected. Analyzing the secondary system. Overnight, celebrity system grade D- detected. Begin assimilation? Y/N. System notification, overnight celebrity system detected. The Tao of fame touches upon all that exists. Whether alive or dead, everything that exists can have fame, and thus become a celebrity. Whether it's your clothes, your looks, your aura, or your talents, each can turn you into a celebrity. With millions, billions, or even trillions of eyes only on you, your each and every move will shake the hearts of entire empires. Become an overnight celebrity, and rule all the hearts of the universe. Or, enjoy the power to turn others into celebrities overnight, and know that you control all their fame on your fingertips. Once he absorbed this new system, Lex would lose the ability to control the system for a while. But he had already made some preparations. With all his instructions already in place, he took out the small containers which would hold the elixir and filled 5 of them with varying numbers of drops. 3 of the containers held 1 drop, 1 held 2 and 1 held 3. This would be enough for him to auction off, and he had already relayed the details of how to accept payments for the auction to Mary. Hopefully he would regain control of the system by then, but in case he didn't, this was merely a precaution. Ideally, he would have wanted to conduct the trade with the Emporium now as well before absorbing the system, but it would take the Emporium a few days to arrange everything, so all he could do was hope the upgrade was completed in time. Just in case, however, he went and delivered the couple of drops to the Emporium for which he had already accepted the payments for. In the worst-case scenario, he would lose the opportunity to trade with the others who had items containing laws. But even so, Lex did not think about delaying the system upgrade. Time was too short, he could not end up delaying anything. "Mary, is there any way I can spend some MP to speed up the system upgrade process? Or do something else that will result in the same?" "Not really. Systems are incredibly complex, and thus the process of upgrading, or in your case repairing, it will naturally take a lot of time. The system already performs at its maximum speed for each repair." He only nodded. He suspected as much. Once all the necessary tasks were done, Lex immediately chose to absorb the overnight celebrity system. Once again, the system interface disappeared and a familiar updating appeared in its place. With that done, Lex turned his attention back to the puddle of elixir. Originally, Lex had created a nice bowl-shaped indent in the ground for it, but the elixir had absorbed the ground around it, and was beginning to grow. But Lex realized that while the quantity of the elixir seemed to be increasing, the allure it held was decreasing. Perhaps the more it grew, the less concentrated its potency became. Unable to decide if he was happy about that or upset, Lex took another sip and bolted to the nearest bathroom. To date, this was his most arduous cultivating experience yet. But it would all be worth it, he kept telling himself. In the end, it would all be worth it. I think you should take a look at. The greenhouse was doing exceptionally well under the care of the galactic sovereign turtle, especially after the turtle grew in its cultivation realm. It was also quite fortunate that the spirit energy inside the inn was quite abundant, for the turtle relied heavily on it to sustain itself. While its body grew in size and adapted to the extent of its new powers, only extremely pure spirit energy could prevent it from entering a hibernation state. Moreover, the turtle was slowly accumulating helpers. Although young MacDonald had been recruited by Lex to defend the inn, most of the time all it did was help the turtle in the garden. Now, it also had the help of Zen, the immortal-level sentient grass, which had finally stopped being malnourished. Its body was now no longer as weak as common grass, and was now slightly more resilient than common weeds on Earth. Every day it was watered from the well of invigoration, and it received the best fertilizer the inn had to offer. Unfortunately, due to the fact that its spirit was already immortal, its body was under a lot of strain and would take a lot of time to grow. Still, at least it could now uproot itself when it took a humanoid form and move around. The latest addition to their group was the young soul bird, who was still unnamed. The light given off by the bird was especially helpful to plants, making it perfect to help them grow. Currently, all three of them were working on taking care of a tree that a guest had deposited at the greenhouse. The tree had been brought to the inn from Earth. Specifically, it was Sophia, Marlowe's wife, who had the tree brought here. Her family had used the tree for generations, taking advantage of its especially potent medicinal properties. But since it had come to the inn, the tree had begun to grow more and more vibrant. By now, the tree had reached 40 feet, 12 meters, in height, which wasn't remarkable, but it also had a staggering diameter of 18 feet, 5.4 meters. Moreover, the tree was radiating an extremely noble aura, which caused all who saw it to want to kneel before it. Well, all but the turtle. While the three were doing their normal duty of taking care of it, the turtle suddenly appeared with a batch of the most powerful fertilizer the inn had ever seen. The previous batch had been fed to the vine near the fire temple, whereas this one would go to this tree. Even the turtle was curious what would happen if it continued to feed it. Chapter 626, reading a light novel once again. Several hours later, Lex's cultivation finally ended. He had originally imagined that after one round of cultivation, the second would be easier, and so on successively. But that was far from the case. His second round was not only longer, but severely more draining as well. Lex practically fell to his knees once he was done, but he was able to steady himself at the last moment. If one saw Lex now, they would be able to tell at a glance that he looked somewhat weaker and skinnier. His muscles thinned out, if only a bit, and his bones began to stick out. In hindsight, it only made sense. He was literally replacing parts of his body which contained laws that were hampering his growth. The first round would be the easiest, while each subsequent round would be harder as deeper and more important parts of his body were replaced. Why were things never easy, wondered the man who literally had a cultivation technique which could adapt on its own according to his circumstances. It would take him a short while before he completely recovered, but he did not plan on wasting even this time. Anticipating his depleted energy, at least, Lex had already prepared a lavish meal for himself, as well as accumulated an entire list of documents that had been prepared for him to peruse. They mostly had to do with Farty's wedding. He had to ensure the wedding was grand while also being limited to the resources and people of the Crystal Realm. Weary and beaten, Lex dragged himself to his office and began reading while he casually munched on some French fries. Progress was slow, because in his exhausted state it was hard to focus on such boring documents. Unable to suppress a sigh, Lex leaned back and allowed himself to relax for a moment. Perhaps a small respite really was in order. Just as he was considering taking a break, his eye caught on the cover of a book. Lex recalled something, and suddenly reached forward to grab it. He did not even remember how long it had been since he last touched this proverbial goldmine of ideas and inspiration. Though there was no dust on the book, he still wiped it, a symbolic gesture of picking back up from where he left so long ago. He could not help but open it, and read from where he left off. On the cover, the title read, Ultimate King Emperor, All the Gods Call Me Daddy. It was the completely realistic and not all blown out of proportion light novel Lex was reading, oh so long ago. Where Lex had left off, the MC had just established himself as a hegemon of a small number of realms. His cultivation level was called God King Father Supreme Overlord, and was the cultivation realm through which his previous enemy had ruled these few realms for trillions of years without interruption. Of course, only 3 hours after the MC defeated the antagonist and established himself, a new series of enemies showed up who were so ridiculously powerful that they could defeat the MC at his new cultivation realm with a single flap of their eyelashes. How unfortunate for the MC, for instead of working so hard to defeat the villain, if he had only waited 3 hours, these new enemies who had not at all appeared for trillions of years would have come and targeted him instead of the MC'd. I think you should take a look at. Naturally, a fight ensued. But just as these new enemies were about to decimate the MC, alongside the few realms he controlled, effectively ending an incalculable number of lives, after which they would trap all their souls and burn them for eternity, their young mistress told them to spare the MC. After all, there was no real conflict. They had only looked at the MC's face, became jealous of his handsome looks, and decided to eradicate all life in this sector of the universe to vent their anger. It was not revealed why the mistress had spared the MC, but they obeyed nonetheless, and all left. Like lightning, they came, wrought destruction, and left. The MC was left with but a single breath left in his body, and a new vendetta that burned hotter than the flames of hell. Then a mysterious traveling hermit, who happened to have the exact same appearance as the MC's adopted sister from childhood, who he was secretly in love with, appeared and found the MC in his devastating condition. Unable to leave him be, she slowly nursed him back to health in her hut. The healing process took 13,000 years, during which the MC and hermit naturally fell in love. With his strength recovered, the MC declared that he would marry the hermit and took her back to his realms to have a grand wedding, only to discover that the realms were in chaos. Some corrupt ministers who had helped him rule took advantage of his long absence and started a civil war to wrest control of the realms. They wanted the power, the prestige, and everything else that came alongside the title of ruler. But, most importantly, they wanted the MC's harem, because apparently he had a monopoly on the most beautiful women in the entire universe, so much so that no other woman would ever be as beautiful as his wives. That was followed by a 678 chapters long war arcade where he took back control of his territories, full of action, love, betrayal, and lengthy chapters extolling the MC's male prowess. At the end, with peace restored, he finally held a grand wedding for his hermit girlfriend. It was the best wedding ever, with phoenixes flying around the altar instead of doves. Spirit diamonds, the highest form of spirit stones, adorned the bride's wedding dress. The heavens themselves sung praises for the MC's dashing good looks. The entire realm was happy and joyous. Of course, how could life ever be so simple? Just as he was about to consummate the wedding, his new hermit wife was killed. Chapter 627 Auction. Despite the extreme difficulty in cultivating with the cosmic erosion elixir, Lex persisted, and soon 3 days passed. The system had not completed its evolution yet, likely because the celebrity overnight system was a higher grade than the farming one he had received. During this time, despite his desire to waste away time reading novels, he focused on work and got as much done as possible. Of course, his attention was forever on his cultivation. Alongside whatever changes the elixir was bringing inside his body, it had also managed to slightly elevate his cultivation realm. This was a genuine surprise, for at his normal rate it would take him a few months more before he made a difference. Unfortunately, while his cultivation had been raised, his physique seemed to have suffered. He was not weaker, no. If anything, he was a little stronger. But he had inevitably become a little more frail than he was 3 days ago. If someone saw him now, it would appear as though he was on the path to become malnourished. After his latest round of cultivation, Lex decided to take a little nap. Sleeping would speed up his recovery, and he had become mentally tired as well after 3 days of continuous torture. The only shame was that he would miss out on the auction, but that was fine. He had passed down the instructions on how it was to be handled, as well as the minimum payments. He was depending on this auction to cross 1 trillion MP. Although his plan involved a few different steps, having at least 1 metric ton was paramount. But he was not worried. The staff at the inn was very reliable. Lex closed his eyes and immediately fell asleep. His body had to get used to its new situation. In the village there were numerous venues, all very large and extravagant, designed to hold as many people as physically possible. Yet today the one which held the most anticipated event of the day, the auction, was being conducted in the smallest such venue available. This was because most people weren't even eligible to know about this auction. There were nearly 100 guests, and the one with the lowest cultivation level was at the Earth Immortal realm. Even the strongest guard from the security the inn hired was also present. Since it was his job to ensure safety, he had a representative for him available who would perform any bidding. General Ragnar, the Emperor Jotun, various prominent devils, and even some extremely powerful beasts were present. As it happened, even Aegis from the Crystal Realm was attending. Since he was here, the Noel family also no doubt learned of the auction, and since they had heard about it, the Phillips family'd, I think you should take a look at. But none from the Phillips family had privilege level 4, so they could not attend the meeting. Instead, they were exploring the inn. Upon discovering it, they did not think of shifting the wedding to this venue. They were extremely satisfied with the tavern. Instead, they were thinking of how long they could hide the existence of such a place from the rest in their realm. If no one else knew, they stood the most to benefit. Each of the numerous guests at the auction was sitting in a private booth. It was not difficult to arrange, since the entire purpose of this specific auction house was exclusivity. They focused on providing services to a few distinguished guests rather than catering to the masses. On the small stage, a lady wearing a red dress walked to the podium. The lady walked with elegance and grace, and her curly blonde hair and sharp blue eyes only served to attract every guest's attention. She was beautiful, no doubt, but it was the charismatic twinkle in her eyes and confident smile that served to elevate her beauty to another level. Perhaps if she had a more sober personality, one would admire her as beautiful if she caught one's attention, but she would not stand out in a crowd. But the way she was, even if she were lost in a crowd of other blondes, wearing the same red dress, she would still be the one all eyes would lock onto. "Hello everyone, my name is Marilyn and I will be your auctioneer this evening," she said, her melodic voice almost captivating the audience. She let out a small laugh of excitement, and even winked at all the guests, playfully. It was clear for all to see that she was quite excited. As strange as it was, suddenly all the guests became excited as well. She was one of the many workers at the inn who had recently been promoted from her previous position as a waitress. The crazy thing was, she was not cultivating anything that would enhance her appearance or captivate anyone. With just her inherent charm, she seemed to be doing so. Well, that and a little help from her stylist, Harry Midnight. Amongst the various guests, Rockefeller narrowed his eyes as he saw Marilyn. More than anything else the inn had to offer, he was enamored by its staff. They would make the most splendid demons if he got his hands on them, he was sure. He just had to figure out a way. You all should have already heard the rules for this auction, but I'll reiterate them nonetheless. For the main items in today's auction, the bidding will be twofold. A minimum bid of 100 billion MP is required per drop of elixir, but other than that, guests must bid using the barter system. That means, they have to bid using items with sufficient value. There is a small list of items which will be given preference during the bartering, in case anyone bids with them, but otherwise all items will be judged based on their MP value if converted. Since Lex had already perused the list provided by the Emporium of some of the most valuable items available in the Origin realm, he did not hesitate to list them in the auction. His plan was to accumulate both material and MP wealth. MP could give him many benefits that he could get from nowhere else, but at the same time, it was restricted in how it could help him. Thus, he would accumulate both. Of course, as you know, other than the main items prepared by the inn, there are some items that have been submitted by various guests to be auctioned. They will be bid according to the requirements of the guest providing the item. Chapter 628, Step Up. Perhaps if Lex hadn't begun the system's upgrade in a rush, he would have watched the auction go through. Since the auction itself was not a part of the core services provided, it was carried out like one of Lex's self-made services. Still, for the items auctioned before the elixir, Lex asked for a 1% as commission for having the item auctioned. He was only keeping in with the rate set by the guild room, but he did not anticipate the value of the items being auctioned. Although the people sitting there couldn't be considered the top 1% of their respective realms, they were exceptionally strong nonetheless, especially Jotun and Rockefeller. Of course, these two showed no interest in any of the prior items, and were solely focused on the elixir. A total of 13 items were auctioned before the main items, and through his 1%, Lex ended up earning a total of 314 billion MP. The items auctioned were mainly unusual treasure that had no mundane version with which they could be explained. There was, for example, a vial made not of glass but flowing lava. The lava flowed within a set pattern, forming a vial. God only knew what it could be used for, but it was hotly contested for. Another example was a ball of light, but it could be physically touched. But if a mundane person tried to touch it they would die, and the ball would erupt into an explosion that could rival several nuclear bombs. That one, oddly enough, went without a single offer, mostly because the person auctioning it had very strict requirements for the payment they wanted. The item which had, up until that point, received the highest bid was a sword. After a very heated auction, the bid was finally won by a human named Lovis. Lovis was a leader of the Paladins, who had long since started using the Midnight Inn as one of their secret bases. Only a very few members of the Paladins even knew of the inn at all. Of the ones that knew about it, most assumed that the small village they had rented was the entirety of their presence at the inn. Perhaps only a handful knew that, in fact, the inn was being used to store and hide some incredibly important artifacts for a very special purpose. After all, since the Paladins came from a galaxy perpetually at war, the need to keep secrets was obvious. But once the preliminary auction was over, it was finally time for the elixir. For a majority of those who were present, their time to participate was over, and now it was time to watch. It wasn't that they didn't want the items, but that they couldn't afford them. The inn naturally assured every participant's identity was a secret, so no one would be hunting them down later if they managed to get their hands on the elixir. But getting their hands on it in the first place was the real issue. They were rich, but items containing laws, just being rich, was not enough to afford them. With childlike excitement and a grin as wide as her face, Marilyn clapped her hands as the first round came to a close. Now, it is finally time for what you have all been waiting for, the cosmic erosion elixir. Gerard, looking ever handsome, walked in from behind a hidden curtain, a single vial of black glass placed on a velvet pillow. Dozens of spirit senses immediately scanned the glass vial, but they were not able to sense its contents, regardless of who it was. Naturally, it was not so simple to peek, considering the vial was provided by the actual owner of the emporium. But Marilyn knew how to satisfy the guests. Though she was technically not supposed to, for a brief moment she opened the cap, allowing the elixir's aura to leak. The auditorium remained silent, for everyone was in their private rooms, but almost every guest gasped as they sensed the aura. A connoisseur such as Rockefeller was immediately able to tell the elixir wasn't fresh, but it was still vibrant enough. As before, the auction price for these will be a minimum of 100 billion MP per drop, accompanied by a barter item. A list of items which will have preferential treatment has been provided to each of you, but in general any item containing laws can be used to auction. We will now begin the auction. What happened next surprised everyone. All the drops of elixir were won by the same person, and because identities were kept secret, no one knew who it was. But both Jotun and Rockefeller were left bewildered, as each and every time they were left unable to contest. It wasn't about wealth, rather, the person was bidding using exactly the items which were given preferential treatment. In the end, everyone was bewildered by the outcome, though most of the participants enjoyed the process. No one knew that the inn itself was the one auctioning the elixir, and everyone assumed that the elixir had been a special commission by someone else, so no one even tried to request more elixir, though even if they did they wouldn't get any. In the private room, the ultimate winner of the auction sat without any expression on his face. His name was Gaborone, and he was a noble lord of the fiery mammoth clan. His subordinate, a sloth named Golden Hair, had long requested the presence of the clan so that they may investigate the place known as Midnight Inn. It was only recently that Gaborone got around to reaching Nibiru. Upon coming to the inn, Gaborone was extremely intrigued. But when he discovered the presence of the Jotun Empire, he was filled with a righteous fury. Merely 1,000 years ago, a human from a noble family of the Jotun Empire eloped with his daughter. I think you should take a look at. The scandal had brought great shame to him personally, but he had endured. The humans had reacted just as strongly as he had, yet Gaborone was not satisfied. He demanded retribution. Unlike the humans, who required the support of a single powerhouse to maintain their race's prestige, the fiery mammoth had many experts. As such, the young couple should have eloped to the strong and fierce fiery mammoths, not the weak and puny humans. What kind of weak, third galaxy state would his grandchildren grow up in? He could not accept it. With this elixir as a gift, he would finally have enough sway to unite all the mammoths against the humans. Conflict was on the horizon. While the rhino centaur with the system was taken away and never returned, the other two were locked up together. It did not matter even if they were together, for they were kept weak and restrained. A special kind of vine was used to tie their hands and legs, constantly absorbing spirit energy from within their bodies to ensure they would never recover. This was the same method that had been used inside the inn for a long time to hold their prisoners. But there was an oversight that the security team made, though it could not be blamed on them. After all, not only had they never been trained on how to counter someone with a chat room, the concept was completely alien to them. All it could be said was that the universe was extremely vast, and contained a multitude of things one could never imagine. Both the rhino centaurs kept their eyes closed, but they were secretly communicating in a private channel in the chat room. "Do you think there's a chance we'll survive?" one asked. "Not a chance," replied the other. "But if there were ever a way, it would be through the chat room." It's too dangerous, no one will challenge the inn for two measly systems. No, there is a chance. If we can get in contact with one of the main members of the chat room, one of the members who has accumulated dozens of systems, they might be able to save us. That way we won't be able to make any money from selling information. The money doesn't matter. We need to be alive to enjoy it in the first place. The last issue is, how will we get them to find a golden key? If I had all the answers, I wouldn't be here, said the rhino centaur in exasperation. In the end, they had no choice but to sell the information online and hope they'd live long enough to get rescued. Far away in the origin realm, on a planet ruled by reptilian beasts, sat a king. While perusing the chat room today, he encountered an interesting request and could not help but accept it. Moments later, he heard a very familiar notification sound in his mind. The king checked, but was not too surprised by what he saw. After all, it was a quest, and he only ever got the same kind of quests. Step up, dance-off system quest, have a dance-off with the Innkeeper for the fate of your allies. Just as he thought, another dance battle. Chapter 629, Sweatshop. Once the auction ended, Lex received an additional 500 billion MP, bringing his new total to 1.384 trillion PM. That would be enough to buy a single MT while still leaving him with some MP for his regular expenses. Moreover, he also received a bunch of items with laws inside of them. Hopefully, he would have accumulated enough items with laws to progress without needing to achieve a SSS plus reward, but his gut said otherwise. After all, if it was so simple, then the mysterious man would have directly told him to get items with laws instead of succeeding in the quest like that. Of course, all of those were considerations for later. When Lex woke up from his nap, he was disappointed to learn that the system still had not upgraded. That was fine. He mustered up some courage, ate a lot of food to replenish his body, for energy was no longer the problem at this point. After mentally preparing himself, this time he took a massive gulp of the elixir instead of a sip. It was not that he had become resistant to the elixir, but that its potency was quickly disappearing. He immediately ran to the restroom and readied himself for the usual barrage, but it did not come. Instead, a soft yet cool sensation filled his body, reinvigorating him instead of exhausting him. To his great surprise, he developed a nosebleed. But he quickly discovered that the blood would quickly coagulate after leaving his body, and turn dark. Strange and unusual occurrences kept happening for a short time, before the elixir lost its effect much quicker than ever before. Still not tired, Lex took another gulp and the process restarted. This time, instead of a nosebleed, he began sweating all over his body. But the sweat would quickly evaporate, leaving small black granules on his skin. The third time, his hair started falling out and new hair began to quickly grow in its place. Since then Lex discovered that the effect of the elixir was greatly reduced, but not completely eliminated. This was both a result of the diminished potency of the elixir as well as his body having gained the most it could from the elixir. In the end, he could continue to drink it endlessly, but chose not to do that. Even if selling more of it would reduce the price overall, he would rather sell more of it to the Emporium and gather more supplies. So then came the waiting game. Fortunately, it did not last long, as on the fourth day, he heard a very familiar sound. New notification. System upgrade complete. System status updated. System, Midnight Inn. System grade, Divine, Broken SSS, B+. System owner, Lex Williams. System functionality, 18%. System self-repair time, 31,760 billion years. New feature unlocked. Midnight Tailor. New notification. Quest partial completion, accelerate the system's recovery by absorbing more systems. Quest reward, 1 maximum grade level reward, not applicable. Partial completion reward, 1 free feature upgrade token. A smile adorned Lex's face when he finally received the notification. It wasn't that he was so addicted to the system that even a few days without it were a trial. Instead, it was that he was on a time limit. He immediately scanned the inn, as well as the tavern, to ensure nothing required his attention. He was pleasantly surprised to discover his new MP balance, as well as the host of items he had received in the auction. He teleported them to his room, still packed in their containers, and then turned his attention elsewhere. The employee banquet would be in 2 days, and he needed to prepare for that. He also had to sell the remaining elixir as quickly as possible. But first, he checked out the upgrades he got on his system. I think you should take a look at. At first glance, it did not appear that much had changed. Even the upgrade to the inn only included one new service. But it was only after he looked into the Midnight Tailor that he discovered why it was that all the upgrades from an entire system were compressed into one shop. Unlike other times, where Lex himself established a restriction on usage of some services by prestige, this shop on its own had a restriction. Only guests with level 2 prestige could access it. Moreover, each item sold by the shop was custom-made, and would require some time to deliver. As such, each item also had a different price. Next, his attention went to his quest. Naturally, the quest itself would only be complete when the system was fully recovered, and that would be when Lex would be eligible for the reward, which would be of maximum grade. This meant that it would be similar to the fully powered butter knife that he used. Unfortunately, he was only eligible for the partial reward, which is what he would receive every time the system recovered by 5%. But the free feature upgrade was quite useful. In fact, it fit Lex's plan perfectly. Unlike the token from the token shop, which could only upgrade a service, this could directly upgrade any feature offered by the system. It was no secret that Lex had long wanted to start an armory at the inn. He had thought about it multiple times. But he was waiting because there was no real rush for him to build one, and he wanted to recruit someone for that job rather than just purchase another worker. In the end, he decided he would build one anyway, upgrade it to the maximum, and then use a token to upgrade it, then supply his workers with excellent armor. Now, Lex could buy a service upgrade token, and already had a feature upgrade token. For his new plan, he first had to set up the Midnight Tailor shop. The shop came with special requirements, and it had to be established alone. Not only could it not be placed near other shops, it could not be near any other buildings. Besides the requirement on seclusion, the building would be relatively massive, as if it were a mansion. Lastly, there would only be one tailor shop per 100 million square miles, 260 million square kilometers. Suffice to say, there would only be one shop at the inn for a long time. Since Lex could not continue his tradition of setting up the first store on Main Street, Lex pulled out a road from Main Street that led to the tailor shop, which Lex had more or less designed as a smaller version of Midnight Manor. Another unique thing about the shop was that it came with its own worker, and that Lex did not need to assign the duty to anyone. The worker was a relatively young, light-skinned man called Jeeves. With the tailor shop established, Lex immediately changed 1 trillion MP into 1 metric ton, leaving himself with a meager 384 billion MP. He opened up the token shop and looked at his options. The only tokens for sale were Feature Upgrade Token, Lockdown Token, Service Upgrade Token, Star Increase Token. Of those, only the Service Upgrade Token cost 1 metric ton. The Feature Upgrade Token cost 4 metric tons, the Lockdown Token cost 6 metric tons, and the 0.5 star rank increase cost a considerable 10 metric tons. Moreover, the star rank increase token had an asterisk on it, leading to a small note which mentioned that the price of each star rank increase token would increase depending on the star rank of the inn. Not bothering to look at the shop for much longer, Lex once again checked the details of the tailor to make sure he hadn't made a mistake in understanding it. Once he was sure, he immediately used the newly acquired token on it. Unlike the mystery trial, which took some time to upgrade, the tailor shop upgraded almost immediately. The requirements of the shop were also upgraded, where only prestige level 3 guests and above could use its services. Lex put on his host attire and assumed his innkeeper identity, before teleporting over. Despite its appearance as a massive mansion, the shop was actually quite cramped. The entrance was a lobby which led to several private measuring rooms as well as private fitting rooms. At the back of the mansion was the actual several-story large sweatshop, where the work was done. The rest of the shop was filled with rolls of fabric, leather, metals and other materials which had been put on display for the client to peruse. "Jeeves," the innkeeper said, as soon as he teleported over. "I have a rather large order for you, and only a few days to fulfill the order." The young chap, who looked like he had just returned from gallivanting across the English countryside, suddenly stood at attention and listened in as the innkeeper spoke. "I have 1,000 orders, each with a budget of 100 million MP. I need them in 4 days. Jeeves, who had come into existence mere moments ago, suddenly started to sweat. Wasn't this a little too much? Chapter 630, The Beauty. Jeeves was stuck looking at the innkeeper, too shocked to even drop his jaw. The budget for this project was phenomenal. Each order, with a budget of 100 million, meant that he could freely use whatever material or technique he felt suited the task. Moreover, the innkeeper gave the task by submitting the number of orders and the budget for each order, but gave no other specification. This meant that he could do as his heart desires, and it was as he saw best. Such a situation should have been a tailor's dream. It had to be known that even after the upgrade to the Midnight Tailor, its prestige requirement was level 3 and each order would at minimum cost 50,000 MP. That was not a small amount, so whoever placed the order would no doubt have endless requests that Jeeves could only obey. Yet a massive budget of 100 million, amounting to a total of 100 billion MP, was given for him to do with as he pleased. Naturally, he had to take his client's measurements and design according to that, but that was the most basic prerequisite. It did not block Jeeves' creativity in any way. But the way things were at the moment, the matter was no longer just about creativity. How was he supposed to produce 1,000 orders in just 4 days? Naturally, Lex understood Jeeves' dilemma. But there wasn't anything that could be done about it. "I'll send Luther over with a list of all 1,000 workers who will be receiving this first order. You can start work immediately. Moreover, you can request as many helpers as you want to help you out to complete the orders." The innkeeper raised his hand and patted Jeeves on the back. "Their lives are in your hands. Do a good job." Jeeves got goosebumps all over his body as he heard the sincerity and sobriety in the innkeeper's words. A determined look filled his eyes as he suddenly began running through the halls, searching for the most optimal fabrics. A single moment wasted was 100 times more than he could afford to lose. The innkeeper, meanwhile, teleported to his office and summoned Luther. It was time to let everyone know about what was happening, but it had to be done appropriately. Lex found it hard to suppress his guilt, since he was literally asking others to go and risk their lives for him. But it was a necessity. It had to be done. Luther himself was quite busy, supervising a plan for holding the rhino-centaurs and how they were to be treated. But a summons from the innkeeper took precedence over all, and he quickly made his way over to the office. Initially, he was full of energy as he usually is whenever the innkeeper summoned him. Yet the moment he entered, he could sense that the mood was not right. The innkeeper was uncharacteristically serious. Normally, he is always nonchalant, so this behavior clearly meant something very serious happened. "How can I help, innkeeper?" Luther asked as soon as he entered the office. It was his duty to ease the burdens of the innkeeper, so if the innkeeper was upset, he was not doing his duty properly. "There is a very serious matter that I need to inform you about. The Midnight Inn, as of right now, is established inside the Origin realm. As such, our hosts have made some perfunctory requests of us. Although I can dismiss those requests, it is ultimately true that we are guests in their realm and they are our hosts. To fulfill our hosts' requests, I need to send 1,000 foundation-level cultivators to a battlefield for some time. While we will not stay in the Origin realm for long, we have to accept the request for the duration we are still here." Luther was stunned at first, but then quickly gathered his wits. According to his impression, the innkeeper was unimaginably powerful, and could control the universe itself with a single hand. who exactly was qualified to host him, and even ask for demands in return. Since this is a request outside of the inn, I do not want to make any demands. Everyone who joined the inn did so to work normally, and not to fight in wars. Therefore, I want you to ask for volunteers. Only those who choose to go themselves, and meet the requirements, can go. If the numbers aren't sufficient and not enough volunteer, let me know. I will figure something out. Luther understood his assignment, but hesitation filled him. There was a question that haunted him, but he did not know if he could ask it. Lex, who was a master at reading people, naturally saw through his assistant with a single glance. Speak your mind, Lex said, the calm demeanor of the innkeeper returning. I think you should take a look at. Who exactly can force you to participate in matters unrelated to the inn? He asked, hiding his bitterness deep inside himself. He knew clearly this matter wasn't simple. The Midnight Inn boasted neutrality, but the moment they made their presence known on a battlefield, it would forever become incredibly difficult for them to claim to be neutral ever again. Although he did not know a lot about the forces in the universe, he could at least understand something this basic. This is not me being forced, the innkeeper replied with a chuckle. Compared to what they can demand from me, this is but a symbolic gesture. The truth of the matter is, I am cooperating in this matter because, in this vast universe, even I, outstanding though I may be, am not without equal. Sometimes, it is better to make friends before you ever need friends. Of course, that was not the truth of his current situation, but he had to assure Luther. After all, Luther would be his mouthpiece in this instance. I understand. Instead of being demoralized, Luther was filled with conviction. In this universe, even the innkeeper needed help sometimes. To Luther, that only meant that if he ever became strong enough, he could be of help to the innkeeper. Until that day came, he would be of service in other ways. If you are able to gather 1,000 volunteers, take them to the Midnight Tailor. They need to submit their measurements. Moreover, find out how many spare hands the tailor, Jeeves, needs, and send him as much help as he requests. This is an urgent matter. I'll take care of it immediately, he said, his vigor returned, and quickly exited the office. He had no time to waste, and neither did the innkeeper. With this arduous task done, he had to immediately return to the Emporium. Once he completed the trade, he had to return to the Crystal Realm. There was absolutely no time to waste. Before he did any of that, though, he took his feature upgrade token and used it on the inn's teleporting ability. The inn's teleporting capability was amazing even as it was. It could access any place in the universe. Moreover, if someone brought him an item from a specific place in a realm he already had access to, he would be able to form a link to that location as well, though he would have to go through the whole process of traveling to that planet first and connecting to it. But Lex wanted his method to be even more versatile. Originally he planned on using the transportation formation he had been given to the battlefield inside the minor realm he gave to the workers, and have them all teleport from there. But with the upgrade, he could directly establish the formation inside the inn. The inn could now selectively allow teleportation from within its grounds to anywhere. This way, once Lex had the opportunity, he himself could also go to the battlefield and link it to the inn. Since the teleportation capabilities had been upgraded, if Lex went to a new place, he would be able to link it to the inn without the need to use the golden ticket, or any other ticket for that matter. With that small task done, Lex teleported to his apartment, and began pouring some more elixir into the vials he had received. Once he had enough, he teleported to X-142 and approached the Emporium. It was best to conduct this trade as quickly as possible. Once he entered the building, he once again saw Powell, and he could tell that this Powell was not the owner of the Emporium, but the salesman he had been meeting originally. "Lex, my friend, I have been waiting for you," he said excitedly. "I've already been briefed on the trades you want to conduct. The item you requested, the diamond containing laws, is ready to be traded. For the other trade, however, you will have to go to another planet. But no worries, I've already prepared the appropriate teleportation apparatus for you to use whenever you want. But before you do anything, look at this." I know this has nothing to do with your current trades, but as long as you're a man, you'll definitely enjoy this. Before Lex could say anything, Powell opened up a magazine and placed it right in front of Lex. The double-spread image genuinely stunned Lex, and he could not remove his eyes from the beauty that he saw on the page. Chapter 631 A Man's Romance. Chapter 631 A Man's Romance. Since time immemorial, there has been a special romance between a man and his mode of transportation. In the old days of Earth, all sorts of animals were reared for the sole purpose of making an excellent vehicle. Horses or rare breeds were sought after with more fervor than gold. Elephants were adorned with more jewelry than actual kings and queens. Rhinos were treated as special mounts, worthy of only the most fantastic generals and soldiers. Then came a revolution of industry, and times changed. Modernization was suddenly the way of the world, and so the world adapted. From the first cycle, to the first car to the first train, the romance grew more and more wild. Hot air balloons, blimps, and finally airplanes were welcomed into the world. People were known in their towns and societies, not by who they were or what they did, but the kind of car they drove. A pilot was not celebrated unless he flew a jet, not a commercial plane or crop duster. A person was only considered cool and amazing if they rode a sufficiently excellent motorcycle. For a long time already, a man would be recognized by his ride before anything else. It was only natural, as a lot could be told about a man based on the car he drove. To be clear, although Lex's inner monologue kept emphasizing on the romance of a man and his car, he was not being sexist. When he said man, he was more referring to the race rather than the gender. He was quite clear that a woman too could completely elevate or reduce her status based on her ride. So, when men and women alike were victims to the beauty of a vehicle, how could Lex be any different? On the magazine before him, on the double-page widespread, was the image of a black spaceship. It was perfectly curved, with no sharp corners or edges anywhere except the very tip. It seemed as if the tip was the very starting point of the entire ship, as if the entire ship emerged from that one single point. The interior of the ship was not visible, and there seemed to be no transparent glass panels to see through anywhere, yet that only added to the mystique of this sleek and slender ship. Towards the back, there appeared to be one main thruster engine, with a relatively smaller one protruding from the two wings on its side. Appreciating Lex's stunned appearance, Powell seemed only to nod as if affirming that this was the correct reaction. This is the Silent Knight, the latest production in the personal corvette class of ships by Havelier Industries. There's only one of them so far, and it's apparently capable of intergalactic travel in the span of mere months. This is completely a collector's ship. Even Powell's voice was dripping with envy, yet Lex focused on something else entirely. Wait, the Emporium is not selling this? No, how could we get our hands on this? Like I said, it was produced by Havelier Industries, and they are the only ones who can sell it. Not to mention, everyone knows what the Gradars are like. Lex, in fact, did not know what the Gradars were like, nor did he know who or what they were. But he did not bring attention to his ignorance for the moment, as in the recent documents he bought from the Emporium probably had the relevant information. It was only a matter of time before he discovered it. Instead, his focus remained on the ship. You don't sell this, fine, but do you sell other ships at least? Yes, of course. A private vessel is absolutely imperative if one is to traverse from one region of space to another. I'll have you know, teleportation formations are neither cheap nor common. Most trade is conducted via spaceships, and unless the distance spans many star systems, most travel is also done via ships. The Silent Knight is a little different, sure. It can even traverse the space between galaxies, so traveling within a galaxy is much faster. But it's rare to find ships of such caliber in the open market. Only some very large empires use them for official government use. So what you're saying is, you have ships, but nothing as good as the Silent Knight. Powell smiled awkwardly, as if he had been caught red-handed. Although Lex felt interested, he restrained himself. He already had a massive ship inside the inn, if he would ever even need it. Moreover, if he ever wanted a smaller one, he still had better hopes in getting it from his system than elsewhere. Let's just get on with the trade. I'll look at ships another time. Even as Lex said that, he gave one final glance to the silent night. This was probably the last time he would ever see this ship, and the possibility of running into it and the owner in the future was as close to zero as possible. He was completely and totally not thinking all of this on purpose, to set up a flag for himself to run into this ship in the future. It was just a ship, it wasn't like he had become emotionally attached to it after a single glance. "If you'll follow me," said Powell, putting away the magazine and getting back to business. "I'll take you to the teleportation room first. Once you've completed the trade, you can return the same way. Please rest assured that the Emporium has made adequate preparations for your travel and safety at the destination. Zuriadissa, being an old client of the Emporium, has conducted many such trades before with no history of foul play. I would escort you personally, but the Emporium has a strict policy against workers leaving the premises." Lex only nodded and followed Powell to the teleportation room. He wondered if he'd be able to link the new planet he was about to visit to the inn now that the teleportation function was upgraded. He would soon find out. Powell led him through unfamiliar corridors, all the while making sure he continued to keep Lex busy with small talk. Although he was not showing it up front, his recent promotion must have made him incredibly happy. Powell could not stop talking about all the new things he had learned about. Finally, they reached their destination, and though Powell looked a little reluctant for he was enjoying talking to Lex, he did not slow the process down. Inside the room was a small, circular platform that was hovering above the ground by only a few inches. "This is the dedicated platform for Zuri's planet," Powell explained. "Although we can activate it from here, the teleportation will not occur unless Zuri allows it. But you are already cleared to travel, so just go stand in the center whenever you're ready and I'll activate the platform." With a nod, Lex walked right up to the middle and waited for the process to begin. Powell did not press any buttons or activate any switch, yet the platform turned on, nonetheless. A ring of bright light enveloped Lex, before he once again began to experience the feeling of being transported through space. Nothing could ever come close to the seamless teleportation offered by the inn, but the process this time was much smoother than his previous times. He felt a dull pressure on his body, keeping it completely still as it was moved through the folds of space. While previously the process left him feeling uncomfortable and disoriented, at least a little, this time Lex actually felt a little comfortable. In fact, it almost seemed like he could understand where he was going. The cosmic erosion elixir. It suddenly occurred to Lex that he had been drinking it non-stop, and that it contained laws pertaining to space. Could that have somehow developed some sort of affinity with space within him? Before he could ponder the question further, he appeared in what surely must have been heaven. He was standing on a platform similar to the back at the Emporium, waving in the wind. All of them had a cultivation realm much higher than his own, which was surrounded by white pillars similar to the ones used in Roman architecture. Above his head was a small dome, as if to provide him with shade. But that was it. There were no walls or barriers, and the entire structure seemed to be placed inside a meadow from a children's fairy tale. The air was so pure and fresh it made even the midnight and same stale, and the soft gentle breeze carried with it the scent of wild flowers. There was wild grass growing all around the structure, with a sea of daisies all around it. In the distance, there were massive trees that reached high up into the clouds, as if creating a border to the meadow. Tiny creatures could be seen running through the fields, and even tinier birds, flying around, drinking the dew off flower petals. The awe Lex was feeling didn't last long, however, for he quickly realized that whether it was the birds the size of his pinky finger, the tiny creatures running through the fields, or even the flowers, waving in the wind, all of them had a cultivation realm much higher than his own. Chapter 632, Clean Yourself. Chapter 632, Clean Yourself. Although Lex was not intimidated for he could escape to the inn whenever he liked, the first impression was indeed quite overwhelming. In a meadow, there were perhaps thousands, tens of thousands, or perhaps even hundreds of thousands of blades of grass, yet each and every one was radiating an aura that was at least at the nascent realm. Interestingly enough, although the flora had cultivation, he could not detect any signs of sentience from them. They were ruled completely by their genetic programming, which told them how to grow, how to photosynthesize, and how to blend in with their environment. He was thoroughly impressed, and wondered if this was similar to the wonder his guests experienced when they entered the inn. Although he did not have an endless horde of powerful beings filling every inch of the ground, the inn itself was also pretty cool, right? Regardless, now that he was here, on this unusual planet, the first thing Lex did was inquire if he could link it to the inn. The answer Mary gave him was yes, but to establish a connection, he would still need to spend an extended time here. Lex shook his head. As much as he wanted this place linked, he did not have the time to waste. He looked around to see if he could find a path, for he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do next. He would have considered exploring the place if the circumstances were normal, but even he did not dare to randomly step on the grass here. Although his defense was strong, he doubted it could handle an onslaught if follow the path, a voice whispered in his ear, and suddenly the 1514. Grass parted, revealing a thin dirt road. Grass here decided to target him. Follow the path, a voice whispered in his ear, and suddenly the grass parted, revealing a thin dirt road. Lex, who remained unsurprised, simply nodded and began walking where the path led. From what he knew, Zuriadissa was one of the strongest beings in the origin realm. Well aware of how powerful high-leveled cultivators became, nothing he saw would surprise him. As such, Lex strolled casually through what could easily be described as the Garden of Eden, and took mental notes. In many ways, the place was very ordinary. It was just that the incredibly high cultivation realm of each and every plant elevated the beauty and presence that they generated. Lex even saw a small butterfly, and he had no doubt believing that a single flap of its wings really could cause a hurricane. The winding path eventually led him from the meadow into the forest, where each and every tree stood tall and strong, making them seem more durable than the walls of many fortresses. They probably even were. It was ironic then that the thing they were supposedly protecting was 1,000,000 times stronger than them. There was no special clearing, no sudden change or strange greeting, Senior, Lex said, giving a simple bow. He was not exactly sure what etiquette to show when meeting such an eminent being. Temples. One moment, he was walking through the forest, surrounded by normal trees, until he arrived at one peculiar-looking tree that was shaped like a throne. Upon that throne sat a tall, petite woman, her skin light green, as if it was made from a leaf. She had a humanoid appearance, though her height of 8 feet, 2.4 meters, made her much taller than any normal human. She also had long, pointed ears, so maybe it was more appropriate to say she had an elvish appearance rather than humanoid. Greetings, Senior, Lex said, giving a simple bow. He was not exactly sure what etiquette to show when meeting such an eminent being, but he definitely was not about to be subservient. Bowing was already enough of a show of respect in his opinion. Of course, he could not be sure that he was addressing Zuriadissa, but the fact that she was the only being on this planet not blasting her aura told Lex that she was different from the rest. Greetings, child, she said, her voice soft and creamy. Listening to her made Lex's heart melt, as if it was the most beautiful melody to have ever existed. But that was it. It did not influence his psyche, nor did it want to make him want to worship the woman. Anything he felt was out of pure and genuine appreciation for something beautiful, and not a result of some powerful laws affecting him. I am Zuri, as you can probably guess, she continued. Your aura is so familiar, child. I wonder where I have met you before. Lex was stumped, for he was certain that he had never encountered Zuri before, but she did not seem to be asking him. She merely closed her eyes for a moment, as if recalling. Ah yes, I see now. You have been near one of my clones. First on a planet called Earth, and then in a place referred to as the Midnight Inn. While Zuri spoke, back at the Midnight Inn, the tree that was being constantly taken care of by the turtle and its adopted pets trembled, ever so slightly. But nothing more happened, almost making one feel as if they had imagined it. Your clone? Lex asked, genuinely surprised. If he ran into one of her clones on Earth, it would be fine if he didn't recognize her, but how could he have missed her at the Midnight Inn? It made no sense. He made a mental note to go back and sweep the inn again, to make sure there were no entities hidden from him. Yes, I have clones across the origin realm. Don't fret. Most of my clones don't really do anything. Consider it an inclination of my plant heritage to want to spread myself as far and wide as possible. Zuri thoroughly observed Lex while she spoke, as if inspecting him for any secrets. Or perhaps she wasn't looking for secrets, and just wanted to study him. Either way, she seemed satisfied with whatever she saw. If you don't mind me saying so, child, your body is a mess. You should consider cleaning yourself. There are too many external influences attached to you. For some unusual reason, Lex suddenly thought back to the system's remarks. More than once, it had asked him to shower, or rather, clean himself. As expected, Lex only took that as the system being mean to him, but now that Zuri said something similar, perhaps there was more to it than it seemed. What external influences? I have never detected any problems. He was, of course, worried that she might mean the system, but his forehead with her index finger. There are remains of one inscription here. Although the inscription, Gut said otherwise. With a soft, gentle smile, Zuri leaned forward and touched his forehead with her index finger. There are remains of one inscription here. Although the inscription has long since deteriorated, its remains still exist, polluting your aura. Then she touched his heart. There still exists a very active inscription here. According to what I can see, it is hiding your bloodline from being detected. Then, she touched the base of his neck. The last one exists here. It is a silent tracker. It will stay dormant most of the time, but once activated, it will immediately reveal your location to whoever cast the inscription. Lex was thoroughly startled. There were so many hidden inscriptions in his body. He had never realized they were even there, despite his extremely potent intuition and self-awareness. The only people he could imagine having placed that were his parents. This was extremely dangerous. He did not know how potent the tracker was, but what if it was activated while he was acting as the innkeeper? Although he suspected his host attire kept his body safe from external probing, otherwise many others would have long noticed the issues with his body. Or maybe, many had noticed it, but never mentioned them. The inscriptions are not a problem generally, Zuri said, but due to the special nature of your body, the laws within them are polluting your aura. Long term, it could be bad for you. Thank you for pointing this out. Lex said very sincerely. He would think of a way to resolve this issue as soon as possible. There is no need for such formality. I quite like your aura, so I don't mind helping you out. Lex nodded, and did not continue to focus on the matter. Instead, he pulled out 2 vials of the cosmic erosion elixir. He meant to give the second one as a thanks, and a show of good faith since she helped him out, but Zuri did not bother with it, and only took a single vial. Perhaps, to her, Lex's gesture was akin to a small child giving an adult a piece of candy. It could be appreciated, but it was not really needed. Take this blade, she said, sending towards him a small clay pot full of soil, and a single blade of grass. I do not recommend you plant it anywhere. There are very few places that can provide the required nourishment to keep it alive. You are more likely to turn a thriving planet into a barren, desolate land than support this blade. Chapter 633 A Favor. Chapter 633 A Favor. I don't plan on planting it anywhere, Lex confirmed as he took the pot. How long will the blade be fine in this pot? Can it last for a while? Not for long, Zuri confirmed. I have prepared the soil in the pot personally, so it should be able to support it in the short term. But at most, in 4,000 or 5,000 years, the blade will begin to wither. Without the host attire to help him, Lex could not control himself from twitching. 4,000 or 5,000 years was not long. It was a matter of perspective, probably. Thank you, Lex commented, relieved that he wouldn't need to immediately consume this as well. The constant cultivation using the elixir had really worn out his body. He was glad to have a break. "Before you leave, I have a small favor to ask." Lex was genuinely startled, for technically speaking, someone at Zuri's level did not need to ask him for a favor. Even if she had told him she wanted something done, with his identity as Lex he would have tried his best to accomplish it, if for no other reason than to establish a good relationship with her. "How can I help you?" he asked, very seriously. "Will you be returning to the Midnight Inn?" "Yes. In fact, I was planning on heading there now. As I have mentioned, I have a clone in the Midnight Inn, but it is still far away from waking up, so I will require your assistance for a matter. You see, although my clone is asleep, I can still sense its surroundings. The clone is being taken care of by a galactic sovereign turtle. I would like to invite that fellow to come and live on my planet. If you could communicate this request on my behalf, I would be very grateful." Lex was now genuinely startled. She wanted to poach his worker. As annoying as he found the fact that the turtle could somehow manipulate his system, he was also extremely impressed by its work. There was no way in hell that he would give him up. You may not know this, but that turtle is a worker for the Midnight Inn. The innkeeper might not appreciate your attempts to take him." "I don't know the details but I've heard rumors that the innkeeper is a dowlord." He was attempting to dissuade Zuri by telling her that she couldn't mess with the innkeeper, but she did not seem dissuaded at all. If the turtle truly wants to leave, the innkeeper will not hold him back, nor will he have any hard feelings about it. Why would she say such a thing? "I can sense your hesitation. I understand you don't want to cross the Midnight Inn for something like this, but let me share a little something with you. Have you heard of sovereigns before?" Lex had, in fact, searched up the relevance of such a title even at the Emporium when he was buying information, but did not get any significant details. All he was able to get was that the Emporium gave ultimate favor to any race with the term sovereign in their name, and that preference was even above his own VIP level. "Not really, no," Lex answered. "There are a lot of misunderstandings about the term. Many even believe it is the name of a cultivation realm even beyond the dowlord realm. But that is not true. This is one of the secrets you can only come in touch with at a very high level, but it's not a big deal if I tell you. The universe is extremely vast, and full of numerous incomprehensible things. Many people like to believe that the universe, on the whole, is a fair place, but that is not the truth. Some races are born as life forms of a higher level of existence. The higher the level, the more favor they receive from the universe. Well, that's not really true, but at your level you may as well understand it as such. Almost everything in the universe has more or less been categorized, from valuables, to races, to cultivation realms, to realms themselves, and more. Each one follows a systematic and logical progression system. Except for the ones that don't. In the universe there exist some things that are completely and inherently unfair. Nothing about them makes sense, and they can seemingly bend the rules of the universe to their whims. Races with the term sovereign in them are races who have such an advantage. So, regardless of cultivation level, everyone sane respects the will of the sovereigns and stays out of their way, dowlords included. I once heard a rumor about a galactic sovereign turtle. It was tending to many planets, as they usually do. They have a great fondness for gardening. But the star system that one of the planets it was tending was eventually destroyed, due to the fact that it was pulled into a black hole. Out of sheer anger, the turtle ate the black hole. Perhaps the absurdity of such an event will go over your head. You only need to understand that a black hole is the personification of extremes in this realm, and even dowlords cannot easily interfere with it, let alone eat one. So you see, in this universe, cultivation is not everything. There are some things that cannot be achieved even with high cultivation realms. So, if the turtle really does decide to leave, the innkeeper will not interfere. He may even be happy about it. After all, sovereigns are unpredictable. I will convey your message, Lex said weakly, as he thought of ways to avoid having the turtle leave. If it really was as Zuri had said, the turtle was extremely awesome and Lex did not want to lose him. If it were a normal employee, Lex would not worry, as once someone became an official employee of the inn, their loyalty would increase. But the turtle was clearly different. Zuri chuckled, as if she could see the difficulty Lex was facing, but said nothing. She was confident Lex would not get in any trouble, so there was nothing to worry about to begin with. You may leave at your leisure. If you want to spend some time cultivating here, it will be extremely beneficial. Thank you for the offer, but I have to depart, Lex said. Zuri did not stop him, and only watched from her wooden throne as he departed, one leg softly nestled over another. Lex, however, did not worry too long about the matter with the turtle. Sure, Zuri was more powerful than him and had a planet akin to heaven, but the turtle had been at the inn long enough to know what benefits it could bring, and what level it had the potential to rise to. Moreover, convincing people was his specialty. If he had known this before, he would have entered a career in marketing instead of computer science, but none of that mattered now. He teleported back to the Emporium and then began the second task on his agenda. He had several liters of elixir left, and its potency was quickly dropping. Originally, Lex planned on simply selling it off. Though the massive amount of liquid entering the market would reduce its price, it was better than getting nothing in exchange. Moreover, Lex had picked up the elixir for free to begin with. But he had changed his mind after teleporting to the planet Zuri was on. Instead, when he returned to the Emporium, he asked for something else instead. You want to look up methods to build affinity for space? You know, that is one of the rarest affinities to exist. Methods to artificially create it are even rarer, said Powell with a troubled look. As rare as the elixir? Lex asked, with a smirk. In truth, he was not asking for this for himself. His affinity was already being taken care of by his cultivation technique. But if there were a way to do the same for his workers, that would only boost their chances of survival in the upcoming war. Point taken, Powell replied. In fact, as it happens, there really does exist a way to do so that actually uses the elixir. But, for humans, it can only be used on cultivators with relatively low cultivation. Not a problem, Lex said, and conducted the exchange. In the end, he still decided to sell some of the elixir to the Emporium. Even with the reduced potency, he managed to procure the teacup containing the law of femininity as well as get 100 million credits with the Emporium. Lex had no intention of using the teacup for himself, but who knew when an item containing laws could end up being useful? Maybe he could even sell it later. In Lex's eyes, it was like acquiring an asset he intended on liquidating later. He also managed to get his hand on the method to induce space affinity, and then quickly departed for the inn. He had work to do. Chapter 634, Locked in his heart. The moment Lex returned to the inn, he teleported away to his room. He placed the teacup aside, somewhere where he wouldn't accidentally use it to drink something from, and began perusing the method to induce the affinity. It was complicated, to say the least. Firstly, the method would work best on someone who was building the foundation. That made sense, since if the foundation could be influenced, then when the golden core is formed the affinity would become more evident. During the foundation realm, the affinity would merely begin to show its influence. Secondly, the process was nowhere near as seamless as it was for him. For Lex, his affinity seemed to be able to change easily, but that was a result of regal embrace. For anyone not cultivating a technique capable of surpassing the strength of their very universe, it was tad harder. Other than the elixir, which would play the role of the main ingredient, numerous supporting ingredients would be necessary. A lot of medicine and healing items would also be required, because during the process the body would literally start failing to function properly. In this instance, even the recovery pod would not be helpful. Since the premise of the pod was to rely on the body's base healing ability, and enhance it exponentially, the pod would not work at all if the body became incapable of healing. That was also the reason why it could not heal golden cores, since the body could not heal it to begin with. Fortunately, alongside the method itself, Powell had provided him with one set of necessary ingredients for the process. That meant Lex could successfully carry it out on one person, at least. He would, in the meantime, gather the resources himself via the guild to use the process on as many workers as possible. "Send me a list of everyone who has volunteered so far," said Lex to Mary, who sent him a list immediately. He didn't know if he should be surprised, or if he should have expected the outcome. As of late, the inn had a minimum of 5 to 8 million guests at any time, minimum. Based on the festival going on, there could be many more. This was excluding the refugees, who had already started moving into their new realm, which they took from him on lease. They would be paying for it for the next 50 years, at the very least. One would think that Lex would similarly need millions of workers to keep things running smoothly, but that was not the case. Lex had a little less than 400,000 employees. The number made him sigh, as it was massive. Yet it seemed inadequate to cater to millions of guests. But the truth was, with the system automating so many things, the employees' workload was drastically reduced. Still, most of those employees were very new, from being less than a week old to at most a few months. Sure, many of them were cultivating quickly, and had gained the benefits of the in-star upgrade, but that didn't miraculously turn them into high-leveled cultivators. They still had to cultivate one step at a time. So, as a result, most of the Foundation realm cultivators he had were some of his oldest ones. Every single one of them had volunteered, so the list that Lex got was not 1,000 workers who volunteered, but only the first 1,000 to volunteer. The rest were kept on a reserve list. No one wanted to miss an opportunity to contribute to the inn. While Lex may have been thinking of them as workers and employees, to them, the Midnight Inn was their life. In the end, all he could do was sigh and give them unreasonably overwhelming advantages over their opponents. Besides, if there was one thing he had learned, it was that humans seemed to be disadvantaged against other races in the universe. Although all the inn workers had the potential to awaken an amazing bloodline and grow incredibly powerful, they suffered from the inherent disadvantage of being human. He had to make up for that. He closed his eyes and pointed at a name randomly, selecting the lucky volunteer who would be the first to go through the procedure to develop space affinity. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that it was a very familiar name. It was none other than the big brother of the inn, Z. Clearly, he was both extremely lucky and extremely unlucky. For this next part, he donned his Clark Kent glasses and teleported over to little Z, who was, for once, sitting in his little cubicle and watching an anime. When Lex teleported over, he saw Z taking notes. In the cubicle beside him, Lex could see a number of Bluetooth speakers, as well as some treasures which were also speakers. There was also a music player with various playlists with names like Four Fighting Scrubs, Hero Saves the Damsel, The Power of Friendship, Screaming to Release More Power, and This Isn't Even My Final Form. "Hey kid," Leo said, patting Z on the shoulder. Z, who was completely focused on the anime, was startled and jumped out of his seat. When he turned and saw his boss, Leo, he cursed his luck. He would have rather faced an assassination. "What do you want?" "I've already opened up all the extra stores you wanted, and now I have a special task from the innkeeper, so I can't do your work." Leo chuckled and said, "I know kid, that's why I'm here. The innkeeper is quite pleased with your performance so far, so he selected you to be the first to receive a special kind of upgrade. But I'm here to ask you if you're up for it. I must warn you, it's not a simple process, and it'll hurt a lot." "I am not afraid of pain," he exclaimed, putting up a brave face. "If the innkeeper has selected me for it, you can't keep it from me." "That's what I thought," said Leo, and put his hand over Z's shoulder. The two of them teleported away, this time to a private recovery room. Leo summoned a nurse, and began giving her instructions. Moreover, he had also summoned Luther, who would be learning the process so he could administer it to as many workers as possible in the near future. Prepare yourself. Once the process starts, it can't be stopped. Moreover, you have to keep on cultivating the entire time. If you stop, the process will be interrupted, which will result in you becoming crippled or even killed. In truth, the circumstances were not so dire, or else Lex would not have elected to use it. But if a person failed once, they could not undergo a second procedure. so he used the pressure of death to motivate them. Z simply nodded, his expression calm and collected, like a protagonist from a shounen manga. Pain could not scare him, death could not deter him. After all, he had already experienced the tribulations of customer service. What could be worse? Leo summoned all the necessary items, and began working. Z was made to ingest various tablets, potions, powders, herbs, and spices, which made his entire body turn red. The medicinal power was too strong for his body, and he was on the verge of bursting. That's when the difficult part of the process actually began. "Start cultivating," Leo said calmly, as he made an incision in Z's right arm and attached a drip directly to the bone. Similar drips were attached to various other bones all across Z's body, resulting in a bloody and miserable sight, yet the young lad didn't make a single sound, and only focused on his cultivation. He had been fighting for his co-workers' honor in the arena day and night. He was no stranger to bleeding, or even grotesque injuries. Lex kept poking and prodding the young lad's body with various injections over the next few hours, until finally the time arrived to add the elixir. One thing had to be said about Z's luck. Since he was the first one to undergo this process, the elixir he would get would be the most potent. By the time the others were able to undergo the same process, the elixir's potency would have dropped by another few grades. As a result, this process would be much harder for him than anyone else. But when it finished, if he managed to survive, his affinity would also be much higher than the rest. Suppressing his emotions, Leo poured an entire cup's worth of elixir down the child's throat, and then took a step back. If all the previous steps were skipped, exposure to a single drop of elixir would have killed Z, let alone a whole cup. Now he would live, but he would only suffer some extreme discomfort. No one spoke as they watched Z's body undergo horrifying changes. Z finally released a sound, not because he was unable to suppress himself from grunting, but because his body was literally making noises. They all watched, and made sure to keep giving him the required medicine to ensure his body kept healing. Leo especially burned the memory deep in his heart. He could have left, but he wanted to watch. He did not consider it a failure that he had to resort to the help of his workers to survive this difficult period. But he did not forget that it was his responsibility to take care of them, not the other way around. One day, he would make it up to them. Until then, he would lock everything in his heart. Chapter 635, Finishing his chores. It was a few agonizing hours, but eventually it was completed without incident. To look at, Z appeared an average 15-year-old boy who had just had the work out of his life. His body was covered in copious amounts of sweat, but other than that he seemed completely normal. The incredibly powerful healing agents had made it so that not only were there no remaining signs of his various drips and injections, but any cuts or deformities he suffered during the process. He was breathing heavily and his eyes were closed. It all seemed perfectly normal. That was if you did not look at the rest of the room. The floor was red with blood and guts. There were unusual impurities which had been removed from his body, mostly in the shape of black grains, but some had come out in the shape and size of pebbles. Although that was far from what Z had suffered through, it was as much of the process that Lex was willing to recall. He walked up to the table with Z lay, and bent down. "The process is complete," he said softly. "You can get some sleep." Z tried to speak a few times, but he was breathing too heavily to be able to do so. In the end, he just nodded, his eyes still closed, and finally allowed himself to relax. Despite his out-of-breath state, he fell asleep in just a few seconds. "Keep an eye on him," Lex said to the nurse, while handing her a book. "When he wakes up, ask him to see if he can learn this technique. It's a very simple one, and its only real purpose is to check if his spirit energy has space affinity." Lex then turned to Luther. "If he's succeeded, you can begin allowing anyone who volunteers to undergo the same process. Space affinity is an incredibly powerful tool that can help greatly during the upcoming battles." Without waiting for Luther to reply, Leo disappeared. Although he had read that the process was going to be difficult, it was only after watching it that he realized just how difficult it was. Yet he didn't let that deter him or change his mind. An unfortunate truth he had learnt the hard way, time and time again since he began cultivation, was that the universe was not a friendly place. One had to be ridiculously tough to survive in it, and tolerate endless ordeals. He appeared near the greenhouse, this time without his Clark Kent glasses. He was crossing out his tasks, and as much as he wanted to avoid it, he could not ignore the favor Zuri asked of him. He did not enter the forest, but instead only walked to the edge and started to speak. "I would like to speak to the turtle, please." Although he did not address anyone specific when he spoke, he knew that while young MacDonald had its roots all beneath the inn, it paid extra attention around the greenhouse. Once upon a time, young MacDonald's job was to act as security for the entire inn, but more and more, such a thing was infeasible. Young MacDonald had hit a growth slump upon reaching the Golden Core realm, and it was mostly just focused around the greenhouse. Speaking of which, the quality of food had really drastically improved at the inn. Lex didn't pay much attention to it, but it seemed the combination of the turtle growing stronger, and the inn getting some farming-focused features really boosted the inn's food production capability. Lex was able to spend a couple of minutes imagining the various delicacies the inn had to offer, and what new alien food he could try out soon, before the turtle arrived. "How can I help you, little human?" the turtle asked, as it brought its neck down to Lex's height. Did the turtle get even taller since Lex saw him last? Unable to answer, he instead focused on more important things. "I have been requested to ask you a question." Lex began explaining the situation to the turtle, all the while setting the conversation up in such a way that Lex would easily be able to convince the turtle to stay if it wanted to leave. As it turned out, he didn't really need to do any such thing. "Oh dear, such a generous offer. But if I leave, all the children will feel lonely. I cannot leave them. At least until they grow up a little bit." As if on cue, Little Blue flew up behind the turtle, and looked down curiously at Lex. Unable to find anything interesting, it continued to fly away. Fenrir, too, came running out of the forest. It stopped to acknowledge Lex, but then quickly continued to run. It was chasing after the whale once again. "I think you should take a look at." "I understand," Lex said with a smile, suddenly feeling grateful for the turtle's knack for adoption. With these few minor chores out of the way, Lex finally teleported out of the inn. But he still did not return to the crystal realm, at least not yet. Instead, after a very, very long time, he reappeared on the planet Vegas Minima. He had incredibly fond memories of nearly fighting to the death against endless hordes of zombies on this planet. Ah, how he missed being weak and feeble. He would just have to make do without almost getting killed at every corner. Before his thoughts would end up jinxing him, Lex diverted his attention towards how the world had changed since he was last here. It did not look like it was the site of a centuries-long war at all. Tall buildings filled the skyline, with familiar-looking ships flying across the sky. In the ground, there were fewer vehicles, because most of the ground level was left to accommodate a lot of flora. Trees filled the streets, with grass instead of sidewalks upon which the locals were walking. Some kind of air train seemed to be transporting people through the city, for those who did not want to travel by ship, or unusual-looking walkways built on the sides of the buildings up a few stories high. The town, city, massive metropolis that Lex was looking at was completely bustling it. The size of the crowds would make even New York City seem like a secluded city, yet everything was done beautifully and in an eco-friendly way. It was mesmerizing to see, but the greater wonder was how all of this was built in less than a year. Sure, he expected the Empire's capabilities to be far beyond that of Earth's, but wasn't this a little too much? Lex strolled through the city as he took in the views, and absorbed everything he saw. He had heard that originally the people of Vegas Minima relied on gene manipulation to grow stronger instead of cultivation, and once the zombies invaded they relied on their cores for body cultivation. Now, it seemed like they had completely adopted the orthodox way of cultivation within the Empire. It was fascinating how many phases and cultures a single planet had been through. As much as he enjoyed his return, Lex had actually come to this planet with a purpose. He made his way to a public services and security office, an organization set up by the Empire to assist the recovery and rehabilitation of the locals. Once there, he merely handed over a card given to him by Alexander to the receptionist, who immediately wore a serious look. She glanced at Lex, as if he were some big shot, but began to work furiously on her computer, as if she was afraid she would be the one responsible for wasting his time. A short while later, a group of military personnel appeared to take Lex to a private and secure facility. That facility, though, ended up being quite far. In fact, the journey took a few hours as he had to be escorted out of the city he was already in. At first, he thought he would be taken to some hidden base or secure location, but he was instead taken to an even larger, more impressive city. In fact, if Marlowe were here, he would recognize not the city, for it had changed too much, but the cliffside near it. This was where he had fought his battles so bravely. But the speed of his ship was too fast. Lex had no time to admire the capital of Vegas Minima. After only catching glimpses, he was already brought to an in-building parking space where the ship landed, and a number of personnel stood waiting for him. "Your teleportation formation has been primed and is ready to be used," said one of the soldiers, speaking as if he were talking about the most grim thing in the world. "Before we proceed, however, we will need to enter your details into our system, is that all right?" "It's protocol." "Sure, no problem," said Lex. He was on his way to the planet Alexander needed his help on. He wouldn't stay there for long, but he needed to at least reach the planet so he could teleport there when Alexander needed help. Chapter 636 Polbitvi. "Please follow us while we enter the details," the soldier said to Lex. "According to our information, you are to be deputed as an auxiliary combat aide, ACA. ACA members are all officially recognized by the Jotun army, and have rankings and authority of their own, but fall outside of the command chain. This basically means that they help the army on certain tasks and missions, but they cannot be forced to accept missions or be stationed in places. The specifics vary based on the role and rank of an ACA member, but I'm sure you already know the circumstances of your recruitment. The point of me telling you this is that, by becoming an ACA member, you gain a certain level of perks and merits which can be availed across the Empire, and you will have a clean and clear identity to use." Lex felt that there was a lot that remained unsaid during the last part of the statement. He suddenly felt like a lot of wanted criminals became ACA members solely so that they could have clean identities to use. That could be both a good thing or a bad thing for the Empire, based on how it was managed. Of course, none of that had anything to do with Lex. He was led to a lab where he underwent a number of tests, reminding him of the time he was tested out in Blue Bird. The tests carried out by the Empire were, of course, much more complex than the ones on Earth. First of all, he did not need to be pricked or electrocuted for any test. Then again, they did not do anything as controversial as ask him about his cultivation techniques. A part of him wondered if during their tests, his DNA would match for any of his relatives in the Empire, as there surely were. But it was never brought up, so maybe it didn't. What he did not know was that the inscription placed over his heart not only hid his bloodline, it also hid his identity from being traced. No DNA test he ever gave would be accurate. He could have become the perfect criminal on Earth, but that was already behind him now. Oddly enough, they asked him very few questions during the test, as if they wanted his identity to be as barebones as possible. They did, however, ask him one question that caused him to pause for a moment. "Name?" "Lex." "Just Lex? No surname or affiliation?" He hesitated, but in the end he simply said no. The soldier, almost as if he was expecting such an answer, only nodded, and continued to create his account. The process did not take long, and in a mere 30 minutes he had become a registered ACA member with an official Empire identity. Coincidentally, the identity token they gave him was shaped like a coin, except that it was black. The coincidence was because this once again reminded him of Blue Bird. But he was easily able to inspect this token and was certain that it had no hidden trackers or monitoring devices. He stored it in his spatial bangle, and followed the soldier, who led him to a completely empty room. It was square, with pure white walls and floor. It looked like where psychiatric patients would be held. Teleportation will activate soon. Please prepare yourself, both physically and mentally. Long-distance teleportation, such as between planets, can be quite disorienting. Lex merely nodded. He was not worried. In fact, he was quite looking forward to it. He wanted to find out how normal transportation between planets was carried out. It didn't take long for him to get his wish, though technically speaking normal travel between planets, regardless of how far, was carried out on ships and not teleportation. Lex thought that when the man said Lex would be disoriented, it was because of the discomfort he felt during teleportation. Due to his physique, Lex didn't worry about that. What he did not anticipate was that the level of this teleportation formation was nowhere near that of the Emporium's. The formation activated instantly, so Lex got no warning. But even if he had, he would not have expected the whiplash his body was subjected to as it underwent what felt like being launched through the air at the speed of a fighter jet. But that was only the beginning. This teleportation was nowhere near as instantaneous as the ones he had become accustomed to, and the entire time it went on Lex felt like his body was being jostled through the air, like a ragdoll carried by a child running at full speed. The worst part was, there was no sense of up and down, because he felt gravity pulling at him from every single direction. Then the teleportation ended just as abruptly as it started, and Lex found himself in yet another completely white room. If Lex were a lesser man, he would have thrown up. But he wasn't, so he only cursed. What the hell was this? He was meant to enjoy the teleportation and experience the advantages of his physique. Instead, he went on a poorly planned roller coaster. What a rip-off, I think you should take a look at. Feeling more irritated than disoriented, Lex left the white room only to find a group of surprised soldiers. But they were trained well, and so recovered quickly. "Are you ACA Lex from Vegas Minima?" the soldier asked, reading something off of a screen. "Yes, that's me." "Welcome to Pulbitv, sir," the soldier said while saluting him. Apparently Lex's rank was above his. It made sense, kind of. After all, Lex was in the Golden Core while the soldier was in the Foundation realm. "Accommodation has been arranged for you, sir. The room will be reserved for you for up to 1 year. After that, you will have to pay for yourself if you wish to continue renting the same room. There's also an introductory packet to get you acquainted with the planet and its culture. Currently, there are no orders waiting for you, nor any mail." "Thanks," said Lex, grabbing the folder the soldier handed him. He then asked for directions and exited the building. It wasn't that he didn't want to spend some time on Pulbitv, or that he wasn't curious about what his new post or position held. He was just a little impatient these days owing to the ever closer deadline of his workers going away. Not to mention, being jostled around didn't really help his mood. He took in the city, but there was not much to see because it was night and it was raining. "Mary, if I teleport away to the inn from here, can I also return here in the future, despite the fact that it's not linked to the inn? Everyone who comes to the inn leaves an anchor behind, which is how the inn traces where to send them back once they return. Everyone can have only one anchor, including you. So yes, technically you can teleport back here if you go to the inn. But your situation is a little complicated, since you can also travel to any planet or area linked to the inn. So, you can return here any time. But once you choose to go to a different planet connected to the inn, or maybe even a different realm, your anchor moves as well. So basically, I cannot go to the crystal realm without my anchor from here disappearing? Nope." Lex released an irritated sigh. "How long till this planet is connected to the inn?" "Well, it will take at least 1 day. It could take more, but you have the advantage that you can come back whenever you want and then return to this planet whenever you want as long as you don't travel anywhere else. This is one advantage of discovering new places on your own, instead of just using golden tickets to travel to new planets. I guess I might as well just get on with it," he said, and started walking in the direction of his room. he reached the building without incident, and somehow even entered the room without being targeted somehow. It felt strange because something unusual would always happen to him whenever he tried to connect a planet to the inn. He had long suspected that, whenever he used a ticket to choose a planet, he would only be given options for planets where something bad was destined to happen to him. Yes, it totally had to be on purpose. But, with nothing happening, he decided to simply meditate in his room, until the planet was connected or he had to return to the inn. Unbeknownst to him, in his neighboring room were two human kids who had also visited the inn. They had been brought there by the pro bono room, and they had experienced the star rank change, which had evolved their bodies, helping them shed their birth defects. They had been brought to this room to stay in by the angelic saint woman who had been helping them. Life had been so good for them, they almost forgot that they had lived extremely miserable lives up until quite recently, on this planet engulfed in a decade-long civil war. Almost. Chapter 637 Machinations. An uneventful day and night passed for Lex, who spent the day cultivating. He was only waiting for time to pass so that either the inn would connect to this planet, or that he would have to leave to attend the upcoming banquet. In the room beside him, the two siblings spent their time feeling extremely worried. The beautiful elder sister who brought them here hadn't shown up in a long time, and was already late by a couple of days. Such an occurrence was not normal at all whatsoever, since this was not the kind of planet where one could travel around safely. For over a decade, the planet had been the stage for a bloody civil war, much to the dismay of the common people, such as them. The star system they were in had 5 inhabited planets, all of which used to be governed by one family under the authority of the Empire. But different branches of the same family had a falling out, and eventually led to a bloody conflict. The Empire had tried to broker peace, but legally speaking, the star system was leased out to that family for several more centuries, so without the ability to completely replace those in power, there was little that could be done. In the end, Polbetvi, which was the inhabited planet closest to the star, was designated the battlefield to finalize the war and establish the victor. The point of this was so that the other planets would at least be spared from war. The proposal was accepted and implemented. But the war just kept dragging on, and many secret third parties began to get involved. Silent partners and secret supporters in the background kept bringing their forces onto the ground and kept extending the war. A resolution did not appear to be in sight. Of course, none of that mattered to the kids. What they cared about was that the beautiful elder sister had not returned. It was not even a matter of self-survival, as they could more or less exist in the wilderness. They just couldn't imagine a life where the elder sister was no longer around. "What shall we do?" asked the girl, finally unable to hold it in any longer. The elder sister said she was a soldier. "Maybe we should ask the other soldiers from the Empire. They won't listen to us." "No one will." The brother started to pace around, much as he had been before they began talking. In the end, he made a seemingly difficult decision and reached into his pocket. Back in his room, Lex was enjoying the feeling of cultivating without having to use the lavatory, when there was a knock on his door. A part of him had been waiting for this. Of course it had to happen. How could he possibly link a planet to the inn without facing incredulous peril? But strangely, his instincts gave him no warning. Mentally prepared to face the worst, he opened the door to find someone dressed like a housekeeper, standing right in front with a trolley full of cleaning supplies. "Would you like your room cleaned?" the man asked in a very droll voice. No thanks," Lex answered. The man only nodded, and continued forward. A little disappointed by the anticlimactic result, he looked around once more in the corridor but saw no impending threat. He only saw a couple of kids walking away, probably to play. He returned to his room and closed the door. 6 hours later, with no other issue arising, the planet was successfully linked to the inn. Had circumstances been a little different, Lex might have felt like the process was incomplete, but for now, he was just happy to return to the inn. The moment he teleported back, he got to work. At the inn, the various festivities were still ongoing. The theme for this week was Spaceship Spa, and so all the festivities were being held inside the ship. That was quite convenient for Lex, as he announced that the village would temporarily be vacated of all guests for 24 hours starting tomorrow. Moreover, he also spent a ton of MP in the event panel to hire temporary staff to ensure everything continued to operate smoothly. Since it was meant to be an employee banquet tomorrow, he obviously could not have the employees working. I think you should take a look at. He planned out the day, which was pretty easy for him at this point due to all his experience gained from planning festivals, and checked up on any impending tasks. The tailor, believe it or not, was ahead of schedule and had almost completed his order. With thousands of helpers, it only made sense. He had completely optimized the process, and all he had to do was the actual stitching. But considering that he was still just a mortal, stitching 1,000 suits within just 3 days was still believable because the system helped him out in many areas. The system was, ultimately, a major cheat after all. The day passed relatively quickly for Lex, bringing forth a pretty unusual sight for the guests at the inn the following morning. Many of the inn's guests had been there before, or had spent some time there at least, and so had become somewhat familiar with just a few faces at least. Yet this morning, while the inn was not bereft of workers, all of them were new faces. Some of the popular shops, such as the barber shop and battle axe, were closed. Members of various fan clubs, such as the Gerard fan club, noticed that the dashing gentleman could not be seen doing his usual golf cart rounds, and no one could reach out to him using their personal holographic assistants. While the inn continued to operate as usual, there was something just a little different about it today. It lacked a certain flavor which the usual workers, with their enthusiastic and vibrant personalities, brought to the inn. But soon, they discovered the answer on the front page of the midnight newsletter that was being passed out that day. The innkeeper was holding a banquet only for his workers over at the party village. Excitement spread among some of the guests as they arrived outside the village, unable to proceed any further. Using their best vision techniques, they tried to spy in on what was happening inside, but to no avail. But the more the matter was kept from them, the more excited they became. Especially because it was a banquet being held by the innkeeper himself. A majority of the guests had never actually seen the innkeeper up close and personal, so he was veiled in an air of mystery and charm. They wanted to see him as well. But unfortunately, there seemed no way to get into the banquet. No way yet, at least. Karen the succubus was casually reading a comic in the lounge. The comic was, of course, based on the innkeeper. This specific spread was delving into the backstory for the real reason the inn was targeted by the evil deity Ra. She had yet to read all of it, but all signs were hinting towards the fact that Ra's daughter was secretly enamored with the innkeeper, and ran away from her home in hopes of being able to pursue her love. The innkeeper, being a gentleman, was of course not taking advantage of the feelings of love of a young girl, but at the same time he could not bring himself to send her back. Their adventures spanned amidst scenic valleys, beautiful rivers, enchanting star fields, and more. The author of this comic, the supposed Rachel, had an extremely vivid imagination. Just as Karen was getting to the good part, a shadow fell over her face. She looked up to see Rocket Fellow standing there. "What is it?" she asked, feeling sour. Just because he was incredibly good-looking, and rich, and came from a good background, this fellow felt like he could do anything he wanted. "There's an unusual event ongoing at the inn right now. Shouldn't you be there, trying to seduce some answers out of someone?" "No matter what kind of event there is, I won't be able to get any answers," she said blandly as she turned a page in her comic. "Don't you know by now? The inn is foolproof. You can't get anything by going at it directly." There was a pause where Rocket Fellow actually didn't immediately respond, which was unlike him. "For once, you've actually said something smart. I can't get anything from it directly, so I've used indirect methods. After some, let's say, charity work, I've been able to pull a few strings. 1,000 Foundation Realm members of the inn are going to be sent out to the Fugan War." Karen was genuinely startled, and almost dropped her comic. Pleased by her reaction, he continued, "Although I've been able to do that much, the actual location of their deployment remains a mystery to me. Gather everyone and find out. This is our chance." Chapter 638 Water War. Attendance at the banquet wasn't really necessary for all the workers. It was more or less just a joint vacation for all of them. Yet Lex did not expect many to miss out on it, and indeed there was 100% attendance even just a few minutes after the day began. The banquet itself would only begin in the evening, but everyone had 24 hours of free time to enjoy themselves. In fact, there were temporary workers found even within the village, so that the workers could for once experience all the services that they were usually offering. The experience was extremely novel, as they had never just hung out with their friends in such a manner before. If Lex were being extremely scrutinizing, he would say that having such an experience would be highly beneficial for them. After all, once they understood what the guests might be feeling as they approached the same services, they could do their duties better. But in truth his only agenda was for his workers to enjoy, and get some time off. Especially now that some of them would be sent away to face untold trials. The sight itself was quite amusing. Sitting in his office, Lex watched as hundreds of thousands of humans slowly shuffled into the village and began spreading out, murmuring with each other in excitement. Among them, the few non-humans were also clearly visible, though they were just as much a part of the crowd as everyone else. A giant sea creature could be seen, its upper body emerging from the waterways in the village, acting very much like a child about to head to an amusement park. A few peacocks which had evolved to gain sentience and self-awareness during the star rank upgrades could also be seen walking majestically down the paved streets. Young MacDonald, Zen, the Soul Bird, Fenrir, Little Blue, and the Turtle walked as part of one procession. Although the turtle was annoyed that it had to spend time away from its garden, it eventually decided to take a look at how everything was going at the village. A lone draconian apostle, Frederick, could be seen trailing that group, feeling somewhat shy. It presented quite an adorable sight as it had rounded up a lot while cultivating near the fire temple. As such, it looked more like a round, massive stuffed toy designed to look like a bee than an actual bee. Of course, now all workers were shy. Captain Cirque, the worker in charge of the massive spaceship, could be seen casually sitting beside Gerard as the old man drove his golf cart. The two seemed to be sharing tales of their own respective vehicles. Luther was standing forlornly atop a massive building, looking down at all the workers, as if he had countless troubles worrying him. Inside a massive auditorium, Z was sitting comfortably with buckets of popcorn around him, watching his current favorite anime, Demon Slayer. Interestingly enough, none of the popcorn buckets were within his reach. But whenever he reached out with his hand, a few kernels would appear in his hand. The process was not smooth or quick, but it happened nonetheless. Moreover, the more time he spent doing it, the better he became. One might even think he was training secretly. But no, he was just being a lazy teenager. Somewhere near a cafe, Velma was excitedly conducting an interview. Although she was not supposed to be working, who could really stop her? As for the target of her interview? It was naturally Harry and Haley, the newest couple of the inn. Although Haley was not a worker, she was Harry's plus one, so there was no problem with her attending. In another corner, Jeeves, the poor tailor, was found collapsed on the ground. Feeling some pity for him, some of the people who had spent the last few days with him carried him to a spa, where he received an excellent massage. Yet, as much as he had worked, he was not the most exhausted worker. No, that privilege was awarded equally to the members of the Bunny Nation. As the permanent workers of the day care, all the bunnies had first-hand experienced the endless energy of young children. Even after the star rank upgrade, when the bunnies evolved and grew one level stronger, they could only barely keep up with the kids. But while the bunnies had evolved from that event, had the kids not done the same? Stronger, smarter, and more ferocious than ever before, the kids played as if the very fate of the universe depended on it, and no cultivator was strong enough to face such an onslaught. The bunnies almost even missed the days where they were actually being slaughtered. At least then their suffering would end. But no matter. They had gained a reprieve, short as it may be. After watching for a while, Lex suddenly felt a little dissatisfied. The workers were a little tame and were hesitating in fully enjoying themselves. They had many hours before the actual banquet, so they should be thoroughly enjoying themselves. With an exasperated sigh, Lex stood up. It seemed like he would have to do everything himself. I think you should take a look at. He put on his Clark Kent glasses, and changed into his Leo persona, before teleporting over. For a moment, mixed in with the massive crowd, he truly felt how much the inn had grown. From a mere 2 workers who only had a 1-month lease, to hundreds of thousands of permanent workers. Then, he summoned his secret weapon in his hand, and locked onto a target. Doe, John's assistant, was walking listlessly. Of course he would feel like that. Unlike the rest, it was not 1 or 2 days that the battle axe had been shut for. John had been challenged to a battle in the murder trial, and it was still ongoing even so many days later. With nothing to distract him, and no way of knowing how the battle was going, Doe was feeling drained. Suddenly, Doe's senses picked up on a threat. As John's assistant, how could it be possible that he had not been taught any techniques to defend himself or improve his survivability? He looked up, only to find a pink round ball closing in on him. He tried to move, yet he was too slow and the projectile too fast. It hit him right in the face, but instead of the hard-on collision he was expecting, he felt the pop of something plastic before a ball of water drenched his face. Before he, or anyone else could understand what happened, a loud sound could be heard yelling, "Water fight!" Tens, hundreds, thousands, and then tens of thousands of water balloons suddenly appeared everywhere. The workers were a little slow to catch on, which resulted in many of them immediately getting splashed. No one saw who made the first move, because whoever it was moving too fast. But panic immediately set in, and everyone grabbed a water balloon. Then that panic immediately turned to excitement, as the first worker threw a water balloon, and then the second. Chaos erupted almost immediately, as thousands of workers immediately entered into a massive water fight. Thousands more began running right and left, avoiding getting wet to little success. The few aquatic beasts that had evolved within the inn from simple animals, and had become inn workers, had a natural advantage which they used readily to start launching water at everyone. But the humans were not to be left behind either. The lifeguards of the inn immediately began using their spiritual techniques which could manipulate water, and retaliated in full force. In mere moments, what Lex had originally just planned out as a simple water fight to loosen everyone up and put them in a playful mood, turned into a highly competitive and extreme water war. In its excitement, Little Blue also joined in. It had also been cultivating, and had constantly been guided by the turtle, and corrupted by Fenrir, who had been corrupted by Lex. It used its newly gained innate ability to summon some water. Truly, it was only a small amount of water. It was not worth mentioning, really. It only accumulated into a tsunami that was over 40 feet high, and appeared out of thin air. When the shadow of the wave covered the ground, the water fight temporarily paused as everyone looked up to see what had happened. All they saw before the wave came crashing down was the little whale, clicking and whistling in excitement. Then, like divine judgment, the wave came crashing down. But the workers of the inn were not intimidated. Various techniques filled the air as they hastened to protect themselves, and prepare for retaliation. In the first ever water war, the weak would not survive. They would win, or they would get drenched trying. The wave crashed onto the ground with a furious roar, and shook the inn as it did. But suddenly, there was a flash of light, and the water parted, split right down the middle. Chapter 639, His People. Like the Red Sea, the tsunami wave was parted along the center, and a couple completely untouched by a drop of water was revealed. Gawain and Anita stood side by side, Anita holding her husband's arm lovingly. Behind them was their baby, being pushed by dozens of her undead abominations. Rho alpha and D alpha S nu omicron V epsilon L omicron M. The baby was sleeping silently, as the sounds of fighting and chaos had finally lulled it into a peaceful sleep. One could not really blame it for not being able to distinguish between the sounds of a water fight that constituted hundreds or thousands of people, and a nice Sunday genocidal massacre. "Please continue, we are just passing by," said Gawain as he continued to walk. One could not really blame him for not participating, as any casual throw of a water balloon by him could decimate all the inn's workers. The fight resumed as soon as the couple passed, with Little Blue becoming one of the main targets. While a lot of the workers participated in the war, more still moved away from it, unwilling to get wet. Yet Lex's purpose was completed nonetheless, as even those who were not participating relaxed visibly. They spread out across the village, and began to truly enjoy all that the inn had to offer. Lines were formed in front of photo booths, many took boat rides in the canals alongside the roads, others still enjoyed the various transports. They ate and they played, and though most of them really weren't tense, the ones that were visibly relaxed. Well, all except Luther. "Aren't you going to join in the fun?" Leo asked, as he walked up to Luther, who was standing on the roof of one of the buildings. "It's hard to enjoy myself when I know what's about to happen," said Luther, his face extremely grim. "Although there isn't too much detail, I've read the files Velma has on the Fugen. It will not be an easy fight. Realistically speaking, I should not even expect those who go to come back. The Fugen are strong, but the inn workers aren't weak either. They just have to stick together and take care of one another, and they'll be fine." Luther didn't speak, and instead turned to look at Leo. He had spent a lot of time at the inn getting to know the other workers. He had a busy schedule between taking care of the innkeeper's orders, cultivating and thinking of ways to improve the inn, but he still managed to take out the time to do so. The one thing he noticed was the unusual patterns with which Leo appeared and disappeared at the inn. No one else spent as much time away from the inn as he did, at least among the workers. Luther suspected that Leo's role as a shop owner at the inn was just a front, and instead he performed secret tasks for the innkeeper. Well, Leo had all but already told Luther as such when he gave Luther some secret tasks by the innkeeper, but he suspected that Leo played an even greater role for the innkeeper than anyone realized. He did not envy Leo for the attention he got. Instead, he understood the necessity. While Luther was in the light, as the innkeeper's assistant, Leo was in the dark, doing things without attracting attention. As a result, he should also be privy to more information than the rest. "Do you know something?" Luther asked, looking Leo in the eyes. "Nothing too out of the ordinary," said Leo, shrugging. "The innkeeper doesn't want to pick a needless fight, so he's going along with things for now. But he's preparing an exit strategy nonetheless. I believe soon, the inn will have its own realm." A light flashed in Luther's eyes, but he said nothing. After spending a few more moments atop the building, he decided to leave for now. After all, his name was on the list of volunteers too. Technically speaking, Luther had only been alive for a few months, so it should not have been possible for him to reach Foundation realm so quickly. But contrary to expectation, he was already near the peak of the Foundation realm. He had abused his bloodline to continuously cultivate way beyond what his body should have been able to tolerate. On the days where not much happened, he allowed himself to feel the repercussions of his accumulated fatigue and injuries, so that the burden would slowly lessen. On other days, where the utmost was needed of him, he used his bloodline even more. "I think you should take a look at." For now, he decided to go sleep in a recovery pod. He would allow the burden he had accumulated to vent as much as possible, so that during the war he had no trouble using his bloodline as much as possible. Lex said nothing as he watched Luther go. How could he not possibly know that Luther had put his name on the list of volunteers first? Yet he had no intentions of stopping him. For better or for worse, Luther's extreme personality was exactly what was needed to survive the upcoming war. While Lex was paying attention to all his employees, he especially focused on the 1,000 volunteers. Yet none of them seemed to be acting tense or anxious. It was as if all was normal. But how could it be? He knew for a fact that other than Z, nearly 600 other workers had also undergone their physique treatment, including Luther. It had cost Lex nearly 40 million MP to get all the necessary supplies to support the procedure, but none of the supplies were so rare that he had to go back to the Emporium. Sure, none of them had an experience nearly as bad as Z's, but none of them were easy either. Even now, there would have been a few still undergoing the process if Lex hadn't run out of the elixir. Yet not a single one of them had complained. Lex disappeared from the rooftop as he continued to overview the day's festivities, and make personal adjustments where he thought necessary. Something interesting, or at least something Velma would have found interesting, was that in this new environment where they were encouraged to relax and mingle, many began showing initial signs of kindling relationships. For now, they were too young and inexperienced in life to take that step, but Lex could already see signs. The fact that most of the ones showing such signs were about to head off to war made Lex feel just a little melancholic. Slow, but peacefully, the day passed and evening came. The crowds which had dispersed across the entire village began to gather once again in an open-air theater. Perhaps an auditorium would have been better for this, but it was not so easy to fit a few 100,000 beings inside one building, and still leave them room to move about. Though it was no crystal ballroom, the floating sky lanterns illuminated the night in a soft yet warm, yellow glow, which brought about a relaxed environment. Well, it was hard to go for different lighting with a baby soul bird around. Though it had been a full day for most, they were not tired. Instead, everyone was feeling refreshed and excited, for they were looking forward to what would come next. The innkeeper was about to make an appearance. Once everyone had arrived, Luther included, the lighting dimmed, despite the baby soul bird, and a small podium appeared. A hush fell over the crowd as they all waited for the innkeeper. As of late, he had been making fewer and fewer public appearances, and when he did, he usually only met the same few workers. It was something even Lex himself had not noticed, nor was he alerted by his instincts, for it had no consequential repercussions. It revealed a blind spot in his instincts, and always relying on them. Before the innkeeper appeared, the sound of footsteps could be heard echoing through the night. The footsteps continued to echo, when suddenly everyone saw someone climbing to the podium. Instantly they realized that the innkeeper would not suddenly appear on the podium. The innkeeper had been among them the entire time, but he had kept himself hidden so that he would not attract attention. Excitement suddenly filled the hearts of all the workers as they thought about the fact that they could have been rubbing shoulders with the innkeeper. "Welcome, everyone," the innkeeper's smooth voice washed over the crowd. "I'm glad to see that everyone has been enjoying themselves. Usually, we work around the clock to serve the inn's guests, but it's also important to remember that we too deserve some rest and relaxation." The innkeeper paused, a warm and content smile on his face as he looked out over the crowd. He could hear them shuffling, he could hear their elevated heartbeats, he could hear their sped-up breathing. These were his people. He would lead them well. Chapter 640 New Suits. Many months ago, when Lex had the idea for a banquet for his guests, he had envisioned what it would be like. In fact, he even did a bit of research on his own instead of just delegating the tasks to the planning division. The banquet would be broken down into 2 segments. The lead-up to the banquet, where everyone enjoyed and relaxed, didn't count. Once the banquet actually began, the first phase would follow some earthly customs. As the innkeeper, he would give a small speech to cheer everyone up, and then he thought about sharing the limelight and having some others come up and speak as well. There would be jokes and laughter, and once everyone was done speaking, there would be a dance, which would then be followed by dinner. That was the first segment. The second segment included activities Lex looked up on the Henali portal, which were common occurrences in alien cultures. There would be feats of courage. There would be merrymaking. There would be duels. There would be cake similar to Saturn cake, except that it would be much stronger, and could affect those at a higher cultivation realm. Lex had even imported a special batch of fruit, which could temporarily turn anyone who ate it into a variation of their race. So, in the instance of humans, they could turn into cat people, or a Kiansa, or something else. The night would end with a few awards and prizes. That was the original plan, and Lex expected it would be a lot of fun. But the plan had changed since then. Now, while he still planned for the banquet to be a fun-filled event, the focus would be different. The inn started not too long ago, and you all joined me only shortly thereafter, but much has happened during this short time. As the innkeeper's gentle voice washed over all the workers, they began to imagine all that had happened. The older ones began to recall the midnight games, while the newer ones thought back to the invasion they suffered during the innkeeper's absence. The Midnight Inn has maintained its pride during all this time, not only because of me, but because of all of you. Rho alpha and d alpha s and omicron b epsilon l dot c omicron m. The innkeeper paused for a moment, looking out at each and every face in the crowd. Whether it's keeping the guests happy, adapting to new events, or facing off miscreants who mean to cause trouble, each and every one of you has upheld the honor of the inn. There is no task too big or too small, for when the inn has a need, you all have stepped forward proudly to take care of the task. Every single one of the workers felt their pride swell up as they heard the innkeeper's words. They held their heads just a little higher, and pumped out their chests. Today we are here, at this banquet, to honor all your efforts so far in service of the inn. But I think, it is not just in service of the inn that you all strive so hard. There is something else that drives your actions. It is pride. The pride of being a part of something as grand as the inn. But how can that be all? I think, it is the feeling of home. It is the feeling of family. The innkeeper paused again, though this time even he didn't notice the slight hesitation. It is the feeling of having something you want to protect. The innkeeper's words and emotions were infectious, and everyone, from the newest to the oldest employees, started to have deep emotions welling up inside of them. So today, here, we find ourselves honoring not just our actions, but each other, for it is us, each and every one of us, who make up the Midnight Inn. But, it is not just our past actions that need honoring. The innkeeper's tempo suddenly changed. His voice, full of vibrant energy, suddenly turned solemn and somber. It is also the actions that some of us are about to take that we honor. I'm sure you all know of what I speak. The Midnight Inn finds itself facing an extraordinary and unexpected challenge. Though we are a humble establishment focused on serving our guests, we have always been steadfast in adhering to our dogmas, even in the face of extreme adversity. Yet even so, in this universe, we cannot stand completely alone. The inn has been conscripted into a war that has nothing to do with us, thrusting us into an unfamiliar battlefield. But when faced with this challenge, when I asked for volunteers, I received an overwhelming response. Heroes of the inn volunteered without hesitation or fear of adversity. I think you should take a look at. 1,000 different spotlights suddenly appeared, shining on each and every selected volunteer. Moreover, a massive screen appeared behind the innkeeper, showing the humble yet happy faces under the spotlights. Each and every one of you carry the honor of the inn with you, and that is not just limited to the grounds of the inn. Since you are going to a battlefield, away from the inn and into the vast universe, then you have to take that honor with you. The innkeeper snapped his fingers, and suddenly the attire of all 1,000 workers changed. Although they all wore suits before, and still wore suits now, the difference between the two sets was night and day. While their previous suits were smart and quite formal, the new suits were not only perfectly suited to their exact physiques, it elevated their auras to make them seem incredibly dashing yet lethal at the same time. Each suit was three-piece, with a white shirt and black tie. Gold buttons adorned not only the front, but the cuffs as well. The left side of the coat had a gold "I" written on it, and the lapel had a key-shaped pin attached. Along with the suit were also a pair of black gloves, perfectly sized so that not an inch of skin was visible between the shirt cuff and glove. They wore Oxfords, in black of course, as their choice of footwear. Above the collar, there was a black, silk scarf perfectly covering the neck, and a suave black mask covered their faces right up until the edge of their noses. Covering their eyes was a simple mask, similar to what one would wear at a masquerade ball. Up until then, the suits seemed to look identical, but this is where a small distinction was made in the suits to favor preference. Above the mask, each person wore a hat, but each person seemed to have had some say in the exact kind. Some wore cobbler hats, others wore fedoras, while some wore flat caps. The innkeeper paused, to allow everyone to take in the sight. It truly was quite magnificent, for Lex could tell how incredibly durable and powerful the suits were. Suffice to say, Lex felt like even if he delivered a punch with his maximum power to one of those volunteers while they did not defend, they still would not be absolutely fine. He noticed that, despite the severe time constraints, the tailor had managed to personalize the suits just a bit. For example, through Z's mask, Lex could identify the distinct outline of earphone wire traveling to his ears, or Gerard, whose suit was slightly more open than the rest, adding emphasis to his vest underneath. He also noticed that, unlike the rest, Luther also carried a black and gold cane with him. He had no idea where it came from or how he had paid for it, but it looked mighty impressive. Know that even as you step out on the battlefield, the Midnight Inn is always with you, the innkeeper began speaking once again, this time only to the 1,000 volunteers who had by now gathered to the center of the crowd. The battlefield is foreign, but that cannot waver your spirit. Together, you have faced and conquered countless obstacles, and you will conquer this one too. Because while others fight to kill, or to survive, you fight to protect. Remember, now or ever, you are not alone. You have each other, your bonds, and your indomitable will, to stand tall in the face of adversity. While war is not our business, that is only because we do not choose it to be. The Midnight Inn does not shy from trials and tribulations, and nor do we cower from the wars of those who cannot deal with it themselves. The innkeeper's voice, which had once lowered in both volume and tone, had risen once again to a mighty crescendo, shaking not just the hearts of all who listened, but the very earth and the sky. The sheer lethal visage of 1,000 geared warriors alongside the innkeeper's inspirational voice charged the crowds until they could no longer contain themselves, and erupted into a roaring cheer that carried across the entire village, and could be heard even outside the barrier, keeping out all the guests. The Midnight Inn had not asked for this war, but they would make the ones who forced them into it regret deeply,